Welcome back to Wolf Heart Tales, where legends are born under blood moons and broken hearts find their fated mates. Before we begin tonight's story, hit that like button and join our pack. You won't want to miss what happens when a king defies tradition for a woman the world calls worthless. This is a tale of 13 chapters, each one pulling you deeper into a world where destiny cannot be denied and true love demands sacrifice. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Wolfless Warrior. The blade came faster than Thalia anticipated. She twisted, feeling the whisper of steel kiss her throat where her neck had been a heartbeat before. Her boots slid in mud still wet from dawn rain, but she didn't fall. She never fell, not anymore. Not since she'd learned that gravity was just another opponent to defeat. Her counterstrike caught the guard across his ribs, blunt training steel that still hit hard enough to crack bone if she wanted. She didn't want to, today. He dropped to one knee, gasping, and Thalia stepped back, lowering her blade. Yield. Her voice was steady despite the fire in her lungs. The guard nodded, one hand pressed to his side. Third one she'd put down that morning, and the sun had barely cleared the Silvercrest Fortress towers. Impressive. The word dripped from above, like honey laced with poison. Thalia didn't need to look up to know who owned that voice. Lady Isolde perched on the stone bleachers overlooking the training grounds, surrounded by her flock of noble girls who giggled like carrion birds waiting for scraps. How many years has it been, Thalia? Isolde continued, descending the steps with practiced grace. 23? 24? And still no wolf. Perhaps it died inside you. Perhaps you're just this. The words landed exactly where they were meant to, in that raw place Thalia had spent years trying to armor over. She forced her expression neutral, her breathing even. Showing pain was showing weakness, and weakness was blood in the water. My blade doesn't need fangs, Lady Isolde. Thalia slid her sword into its sheath with deliberate calm. As you just witnessed, Isolde's perfect smile faltered. Just for a moment. Then it settled back into place like a mask she'd worn so long it had fused to her skin. A blade won't warm your bed, dear, Isolde purred. And it certainly won't make Prince Declan see you as anything more than entertainment. The word hit harder than any sword. Entertainment. Thalia felt something crack inside her chest, but her face remained stone. She'd learned that skill too, how to bleed internally where no one could see. Excuse me. She walked past Isolde without another word, aware of the laughter following her like ghosts. The fortress corridors were blessedly empty at this hour. Her footsteps echoed against ancient stone as she made her way toward the eastern wing, trying not to think about Isolde's words. Entertainment. Was that truly all she was to Declan after 10 years? She remembered the first time she'd seen him. 12 years old, both of them, though he'd seemed to exist in an entirely different world. Golden-haired and beautiful even then. Moving through the training grounds like the sun itself had chosen to walk among mortals. Thalia had been on the ground that day, knocked flat by a strike she hadn't seen coming, mouth full of dirt and pride choking her worse than mud. Declan had stopped. I looked down at her, offered his hand. You fall beautifully, he'd said with that smile that made people forget how to breathe. Want to try again? And she had tried. Gods, how she'd tried. Every day, for 10 years. Getting up after every fall, swallowing every insult, training until her muscles screamed and her hands bled. All because somewhere between shared training sessions and stolen conversations, her foolish heart had decided it belonged to him. Declan never promised anything. That was the perfect cruelty of it. He never spoke words that could be held against him. Only glances that lingered too long. Touches that felt intentional. Smiles meant only for her in crowded rooms. Crumbs. She'd gathered them with both hands, convincing herself they'd somehow become whole. You're special, Thalia, he'd say sometimes when they were alone. Different from the others. And she believed it. How could she not, when his eyes found hers through crowds? When he chose her to sit beside him during informal meals. When he whispered jokes in her ear during tedious ceremonies, making her bite her lip to hide laughter. But Declan also disappeared. Days at a time with other women, returning with stories Thalia pretended not to hear. Then he'd come back to her as if nothing had happened, as if she were a safe harbor he could always return to. Thalia stopped at one of the corridor windows, looking down at the training grounds. From here, she could see the soldiers beginning their morning routines. Small figures moving in familiar patterns. Then her eyes caught something else. A solitary figure on the highest terrace of the Eastern Tower. Unmoving. Watching. King Kieran. Even from this distance, even without seeing his face clearly, Thalia knew his eyes were fixed on her. She could feel it, that weight of attention that had followed her for years. It wasn't the first time. Over the years, Thalia had noticed the king in unexpected moments. At the edge of the training grounds, when she thought no one was watching. In corridors, when she carried reports. In gardens, when she helped the healers gather herbs. Kieran was always there. Watching. Never approaching. He was everything Declan wasn't. Where the prince was light and laughter, the king was shadow and silence. 7 years older than his brother, Kieran had taken the crown far too young when their father fell in battle, and he'd worn that weight ever since with a gravity that made even the elders straighten unconsciously. Thalia looked away, for the word had ignited hope in Thalia's chest, that stubborn flame that refused to die no matter how many times reality tried to drown it. She watched from her corner as nobles danced in swirling colors. Elders spoke in clusters, their deep voices blending with musicians. And on the raised dais, King Kieran sat watching everything with those storm-gray eyes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. He wore black tonight. He always wore black, as if he'd decided long ago that color had no place in a king's wardrobe. His dark hair was tied back, revealing the strong line of his jaw and a face carved from stone and shadow. He didn't dance, didn't smile, simply existed there like a gravitational force everyone felt while pretending to ignore. As if sensing her stare, Kieran turned his head. His eyes met Thalia's across the crowded hall. She felt the air leave her lungs. There was something in that look, an intensity that didn't match the distance between them. A question she didn't know how to answer. And the tower, her heart beating strangely fast. Why did he watch? What did he see when he looked at her? She pushed the thought aside. She had no time for riddles. Not when her own life was complicated enough. Not when tonight's feast would determine everything. The great hall blazed with crimson and gold banners that evening. Thalia stood near a stone pillar, feeling utterly out of place in her simple dress among the silks and jewels of true nobility. The celebration honored warriors returning from the northern border, a victory that had bought months of peace. "Stay where I can see you," Declan had said earlier, that devastating smile in place. Tonight is special. Special. For one insane moment, Thalia had the feeling the king could see through all her defenses, straight into the place where she kept her deepest wounds. Then Declan appeared beside her, shattering the spell. "There you are." He held 2 glasses of wine, his smile wide, his eyes bright with something she couldn't immediately name. "I've been looking for you." Thalia accepted the glass, trying to calm her racing heart. "You said tonight would be special. What did you mean?" Declan took a long sip before answering. There was a flush on his cheeks that revealed this wasn't his first glass. Maybe not even his fourth. "The crescent moon ritual," he said, voice slightly louder than necessary. "It's in 2 weeks." Thalia's stomach dropped. The ritual. The ancient ceremony where wolves claimed their mates, sealing destinies and forging alliances. She'd watched several over the years, always from the shadows. Always knowing her place in that sacred circle was impossible. How could she be claimed when she didn't even have a wolf? "I know," she managed, keeping her voice neutral. "What does that have to do with me?" Declan stepped closer. So close she could feel his warmth, smell wine on his breath. "Everything," he whispered. "It has everything to do with you." Then, before she could process those words, he turned to the cluster of young nobles nearby, drawn to Declan's natural magnetism like moths to flame. "Did you hear?" Declan's voice cut through surrounding conversations, loud enough for dozens to hear. "At the next crescent moon ritual, I'm going to claim Thalia." The silence that followed was absolute. Thalia felt blood drain from her face. Around her, stares multiplied, surprised, curious, openly hostile. Whispers began immediately, spreading through the hall like wildfire through dry grass. The prince is going to claim her? But she doesn't have a wolf. She must have bewitched him. This is a joke, surely? Thalia wanted to disappear. Wanted the floor to open and swallow her whole. But also, and she hated herself for it, she felt hope explode inside her chest like sunrise. He chose me. After all these years, he finally chose me. Declan turned to her, his triumphant smile clearly satisfied with the reaction he'd provoked. Surprise, he said softly. Thalia opened her mouth to respond, to question, to say anything that wasn't just standing there like a fool. But her eyes, acting on instinct, sought the throne at the back of the hall. Kieran was no longer watching the crowd. He was looking directly at her. And the expression on his face, something like contained concern mixed with something darker, sent a chill racing down Thalia's spine that had nothing to do with the temperature in the room. Chapter 2. The Weight of Promises. The days following Declan's declaration felt like walking through a dream that kept threatening to become a nightmare. News spread through Silvercrest Fortress like plague, infecting every conversation, every glance, every interaction. Thalia couldn't cross a corridor without hearing her name whispered. Couldn't enter a room without feeling judgmental eyes tracking her movements like predators sizing up wounded prey. Training became a battlefield of a different kind. The soldiers who once ignored her with almost respectful indifference now seemed determined to prove she wasn't worthy of standing among them, much less of becoming a prince's chosen mate. Reset. Commander Valen roared when Thalia hit the ground for the third time that morning, knocked down by an obviously illegal strike. The guard who'd taken her down, a massive man with a scar bisecting his face, didn't apologize. He simply smiled, baring teeth. The future lady of the prince needs to learn to defend herself better, he said loud enough for everyone to hear. Or, does she plan on using other talents? Laughter rippled through the training grounds. Always laughter. Thalia stood slowly, ignoring the pain shooting through her shoulder. She raised her sword and attacked. This time, she didn't follow the rules either. The guard collapsed with a shout of surprise when she struck the side of his knee, dropping him. She pressed her blade to his throat before he could recover. My talents, she said, breathless but steady, are right here. Would you like me to demonstrate any others? The silence on the training grounds was absolute. Thalia stepped back, sheathed her sword, and walked away without looking behind her. Only when she was hidden in the shadows of the stables did she allow her hands to tremble. 2 weeks. Just hold on for 2 more weeks. You're bleeding. The voice made her jump. Thalia spun, heart racing, and found King Kieran standing at the stable entrance. Sunlight outlined his dark silhouette in gold, making him look like something carved from shadow and flame. Your Majesty. She bowed quickly, trying to hide her still shaking hands. I didn't know you were here. Kieran didn't move. His storm gray eyes dropped to her shoulder, where red was beginning to spread through fabric. You should see the healer. Not a suggestion. An order wrapped in the calmest voice in the world. It's just a scratch, Thalia said, hating how small her voice sounded. It happens during training. It shouldn't happen like that. Kieran stepped into the stable, and she resisted the instinct to step back. I saw what he did. The blow was intentional. Thalia blinked, startled. You saw? Something flickered across the king's face, too fast to identify before his usual neutral expression settled back into place. I watch my soldiers, he said. All of them. But you don't watch all of them the way you watch me, Thalia thought, and immediately despised herself for it. What did she know about what the king did or didn't do? Thank you for your concern, Your Majesty. She forced her voice steady. I'll see the healer. She moved to walk past him, but Kieran didn't step aside. For one agonizing moment they stood there. She tried not to breathe. He looked at her with an intensity that made her blood run faster. Thalia, he said her name as if testing its weight on his tongue. Are you sure you know what you're doing? The question caught her off guard. What do you mean?
Kieran hesitated.
Hesitation looked strange on him, a king who made life and death decisions without flinching, who commanded armies with a single word, who made nobles tremble with one glance. "My brother," he began, then stopped. His jaw tightened visibly. "Declan is impulsive. He acts on excitement and often retreats when reality sets in." Thalia felt something cold spread through her stomach. "What are you trying to say?" "I'm saying you deserve someone who is certain." Kieran's eyes met hers, and there was something there, something she couldn't name, something that made her heart beat in the wrong rhythm. Someone who doesn't need wine to find courage. The silence between them stretched, heavy with meanings Thalia couldn't or wouldn't decipher. "Declan chose me," she finally said, the words sounding more defensive than she intended. "For the first time in my entire life, someone chose me. I won't question that." Something shut down in Kieran's expression. "As you wish." He stepped aside, clearing the way. "Tend to that wound." Thalia walked past him, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell pine and leather, and something else, something that made her head spin in ways it shouldn't. She didn't look back as she walked toward the fortress. If she had, she would have seen Kieran still standing at the stable entrance, fists clenched, eyes following her every step as if he were battling something far greater than himself. Lady Aurelia Nightshade arrived 3 days before the ritual. Thalia saw her first from the gardens, where she was helping Sage Elias transplant lavender seedlings. The carriage that rolled through the main gates was absurdly elaborate, polished black wood with silver details that caught sunlight like captured stars. The horses pulling it were white as fresh snow. And the woman who stepped out was even more elaborate. Aurelia Nightshade had the kind of beauty that looked engineered for maximum impact. Her crimson hair flowed in perfect waves over shoulders left bare by an emerald dress that probably cost more than Thalia would earn in 5 years. Her ice blue eyes swept across the courtyard with the efficiency of a general surveying a battlefield. When those eyes landed on Thalia across the garden's distance, something in them gleamed. Recognition. The kind predators feel when they identify prey. "Who is she?" Thalia asked Elias, unable to look away. The old healer straightened with difficulty, leaning on his shovel. "Lady Aurelia Nightshade, Duke's daughter from the Crimson Eastern Courts." He spat on the ground, a gesture of disdain Thalia had never seen from him. "They say she came to win the king. May the gods protect us from women like her." Thalia watched as Aurelia was greeted by servants, as her trunks were unloaded, as she walked into the fortress with the posture of someone who already considered herself its mistress. At the Crescent Moon Ball, it was tradition for ladies from all lands to come and compete for the chance to be claimed by the king or prince. But something in Thalia's chest tightened, a warning, maybe a premonition. 3 days. In 3 days, I'll be claimed by Declan. In 3 days, everything will change. What could a newly arrived noble do in so little time? The answer came faster than expected. At dinner that night, Aurelia was seated beside Declan. Thalia, relegated to a secondary table because of court conventions, as if there were conventions for someone who wasn't officially anything, watched as the crimson-haired beauty laughed at every joke the prince made, touched his arm with practiced familiarity, leaned in to whisper things that made Declan smile in the same way he used to smile at her. It wasn't jealousy, Thalia told herself. She had no right to feel jealous of something that wasn't yet hers. But it hurt. God, it hurts. "She's good," a voice said beside her. Thalia almost dropped her water glass. She turned and found a young woman she didn't recognize, brown hair pinned in a loose bun, eyes far too sharp for such a young face. "Sorry?" "Lady Aurelia," the young woman clarified, sitting beside Thalia without asking permission. "She's very good at what she does. Already destroyed 3 engagements in the Eastern Courts before coming here. Rumor says she came for the king, but seems she found a consolation prize along the way." Thalia returned her gaze to the high table, where Aurelia now rested her hand over Declan's with an intimacy that made Thalia's stomach twist. "Who are you?"
"Cora.
10th degree cousin of someone important enough for me to be here, but not important enough for anyone to remember my name." She shrugged. "I observe things." That's what invisible people do. And what have you observed? Cora tilted her head, studying Thalia with disarming frankness. That you're about to lose a war you don't even know you're fighting. That Lady Aurelia identified you as an obstacle the second she stepped out of that carriage. And that the prince... She paused, something like pity flickering in her eyes. The prince has never been very good at resisting things that are shiny and new. Thalia swallowed hard. Declan promised me. Declan promises many things. Cora stood, smoothing her skirts. The question is what he keeps. She walked away before Thalia could respond, disappearing among the guests as if she'd never been there. Thalia looked back at the high table. Declan was laughing at something Aurelia had said, his head thrown back, completely absorbed. And on the elevated throne, King Kieran watched. Not Aurelia. Not Declan. Her. Thalia felt the weight of that gaze like something physical, like hands pressing on her shoulders, like a question she didn't know how to answer.
What do you want from me?
The king looked away first, turning his attention to a counselor approaching him. But Thalia could still feel the warmth where that gaze had touched, like an invisible mark burning on her skin. The next 3 days were systematic torture. Aurelia seemed to be everywhere at once. In the gardens when Thalia walked to training. In the corridors when she returned to her quarters. At meals, taking the place that should have been hers at Declan's side. The crimson-haired woman wasn't openly hostile. She was worse than that. She was sweet. Polite. She spoke to Thalia with such exaggerated kindness it bordered on insult, always finding subtle ways to highlight everything that set them apart. What a lovely dress, Thalia, Aurelia said one day in the corridor. So practical. Perfect for someone who spends so much time on training fields. Thalia, dear, you must teach me how you manage to train with the men without completely ruining your hands. Mine would be destroyed. Oh, you're helping the healer again. How dedicated. It's so nice to see someone who knows her place. Every word was a fine cut, almost invisible, but bleeding just the same. And Declan. Declan was disappearing. Not physically. He was still there, still appeared at dinners, still smiled at Thalia when their eyes met. But there was a new distance, a hesitation where there used to be certainty. He no longer sought her out between events. Didn't wait for her after training. Didn't whisper jokes in her ear or make her feel like she was the only person in the room. On the eve of the ritual, Thalia found him alone in the gardens. Declan. He turned, and for a moment, only a moment, she saw something like guilt flash in his eyes. Thalia. He smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. What are you doing out here so late? Looking for you. She stepped closer, trying to ignore the alarm screaming in her chest. I wanted to talk about tomorrow. Declan glanced away, running a hand through his golden hair. Tomorrow? The ritual. She clarified unnecessarily. Do you still want to claim me? The silence that followed was the most honest answer Declan had given in weeks. Thalia, he sighed, still not looking at her. Things have gotten complicated. Complicated how? The council is pressuring. My brother is questioning. You promised. Thalia's voice came out steadier than she felt. In front of everyone. You promised me. I know. Declan took a step toward her, hands raised in a calming gesture. And I will keep my word. I just need time to sort some things out. Time. Trust me, Thalia. He took her hands in his, and for a second, she allowed herself to believe. I would never let you down. You know that. But she was no longer sure she did. Thalia nodded. Let him kiss her forehead. Let him leave her there in the garden with a heavy heart and a mind in turmoil. When she finally turned to walk back to the fortress, she caught a glimpse of movement in one of the upper windows. A shadow. Watching. She knew, without needing to see clearly, that it was Kieran. And somehow, that silent presence felt more real than any of Declan's words. Chapter 3. The Crescent Moon Ritual. The night of the ritual arrived with a moon so bright it seemed to turn darkness into silver daylight. Thalia stood before the mirror in her small quarters, trying to steady hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The dress Mila had helped her find was simple, white and deep blue with minimal adornment, the best she owned. Her dark hair was braided and left to fall down her back. She'd scrubbed her hands until they were raw, trying to erase the calluses and scars that marked her as different from the soft-skinned noble women who would fill the hall tonight. But the scars remained. They always did. "You look beautiful," Mila said softly, adjusting the dress one final time. The servant had become something close to a friend in recent weeks, one of the few people who spoke to Thalia without malice or pity. "I look terrified," Thalia corrected, meeting her own eyes in the mirror. They were too wide, too vulnerable. She'd spent years building walls around herself, and tonight they felt paper-thin. That too. Mila squeezed her shoulder gently. "But anyone who matters will see past that. Will they?"
Thalia wanted to ask.
"Will Declan?" But there was no time for doubt. The bells were already ringing, calling everyone to the sacred lunar hall. The hall had been transformed into something from ancient legend. Torches burned in iron stands, casting dancing shadows across stone walls carved with the history of their people. The sacred circle was drawn at the center of the marble floor, ancestral runes glowing with a light Thalia couldn't explain, as if the stone itself remembered what was about to happen here. The audience formed a ring around it. Nobles in their finest silks, elders in ceremonial robes, counselors watching with calculating eyes, all waiting. Thalia felt like a sacrifice being led to an altar. She found her place among the other young women waiting to be claimed, or hoping to be. Lady Isolde stood nearby, her perfect features arranged in a smirk that promised entertainment. Aurelia Nightshade was there too, crimson hair like blood against her ivory gown, blue eyes tracking Thalia with predatory interest. "Nervous?" Aurelia asked sweetly, moving closer. "You should be. This is quite the spectacle for someone in your position." Thalia didn't answer. She'd learned that silence was sometimes the best weapon. The ceremony began with the sound of a gong that seemed to vibrate through Thalia's bones. Young wolves were called to the center one by one to make their claims. Thalia watched as couples formed, some expected, others surprising. Each union was sealed with clasped hands and formal declarations. The applause was polite, the smiles calculated, the entire ceremony a political choreography disguised as tradition. And then Declan's name was called. "Prince Declan, second heir to the throne of the Bloodstone Realm, have you come to make your claim?" Thalia's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. The moment everything would change. She stepped forward because that's what was expected. What everyone expected. She felt eyes turn toward her, some curious, others openly disdainful. Heard whispers begin again. Is she really going through with this? The wolfless one. What could the prince possibly see in? Declan raised his hand, cutting through the whispers. Thalia stopped walking. Something in his posture, in the way he held himself, sent ice flooding through her veins. "This year," his voice came out thin, almost inaudible. "This year, I claim no one." The words echoed through the hall, bouncing off stone walls, off shocked faces, into Thalia's soul where they shattered everything she'd built. She stood frozen. Her feet simply stopped, as if her body had received the message before her mind could process it. "Perhaps at the next ritual," Declan added, still not looking at her, still not meeting her eyes. "Perhaps at the next ritual." Perhaps. The word was worse than rejection. It was a dismissal. It was being told she wasn't even worth a clear answer. Thalia hadn't been rejected. She hadn't been traded. She had simply been abandoned, left standing exposed at the center of a hall full of people who had always known she wasn't worthy. "You were right," she wanted to scream to every voice that had humiliated her over the years. "You were always right." The whispers started. Then the snickers. Then the heavy silence of those who watch tragedy unfold in real time and can't look away. Thalia tried to step back, tried to find the strength to turn around and walk out of that hall with what little dignity she had left. But her body wouldn't obey. She was frozen, rooted to the floor, more exposed than she'd ever been in her entire life. "Move," she commanded herself. "Move, move, move." But she couldn't. And it was in that moment, exactly that moment, when the entire world seemed to be collapsing around her, that something changed. A movement at the edge of her vision. A figure rising from the ceremonial throne. King Kieran. The Shadow King descended the steps of the dais with slow, deliberate strides. Each footfall echoed in the absolute silence that had overtaken the hall. His face was carved stone, unreadable, but his eyes, his storm-gray eyes burned with something Thalia had never seen before. Fury. Controlled, contained, but absolutely devastating. He walked through the sacred circle as if the ancient runes didn't exist, as if rules didn't apply to him. And perhaps they didn't, because he was the king, and kings made their own rules. He stopped beside Thalia. So close she could feel his warmth, smell pine and storm, feel the barely restrained power radiating from him like heat from a forge. Kieran looked at Declan. The prince visibly paled, stepping back instinctively in the face of his older brother's quiet rage. Then the king turned to the entire hall, to the gaping nobles, to the outraged elders, to Aurelia frozen in place with her carefully spun web of schemes crumbling before her eyes, and spoke.
His voice was calm.
Controlled. Absolutely devastating. My brother could not claim her. A pause that felt like it lasted an eternity. Because the one who will do it is me. The world exploded into chaos. Voices erupted from every corner. Elders rose from their seats, ceremonial robes billowing. Nobles exchanged glances heavy with shock and political calculation. The whispers and shouts became absolute pandemonium. And through it all, Thalia stood motionless, unable to process what had just happened. Kieran didn't touch her. Didn't grab her or force her or treat her like property to be claimed. He simply extended his hand. Palm up. Fingers open. Waiting. Offering. Respecting. Letting her choose. Thalia stared at that hand as if it belonged to some otherworldly creature. She looked at Kieran's face, searching for explanation, for motive, for something that might make sense. She found nothing but certainty. His eyes held hers, and there was something in them, something she couldn't name, something that had been building for years without her knowing, that made her chest tighten almost painfully. She didn't know why she did what she did next. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe instinct. Maybe something deeper, something that had been waiting for this moment without her knowledge. Thalia's hand found his. The instant their skin touched, something inside her, something that had been silent for 23 years, stirred. A spark. A warmth. A sensation like lightning racing up her arm, through her chest, straight to her heart. Her eyes widened. Her breath caught. And Kieran's expression shifted into something that looked like recognition mixed with relief, as if he'd been waiting his entire life to feel exactly this. I claim Thalia, he said, his voice carrying through the hall despite the chaos, as my chosen mate before the sacred circle and the moon that witnesses all. The ancient runes carved into the floor flared brighter, responding to his declaration. The bond was spoken. The claim was made. And, according to the oldest laws of their kind, it was now irrevocable. Elder Thane was the first to find his voice, rising from his seat with a face purple with rage. This is an affront to tradition. The king cannot simply. The king can, Kieran interrupted, his voice still calm but carrying the weight of absolute authority. And the king just did. He hadn't released Thalia's hand. She noticed that with strange clarity, as if her mind were clinging to small details so it wouldn't have to face the enormity of what was happening. His hand was warm, steady, surprisingly calloused, the hands of a warrior, not just a ruler. Your Majesty, Counselor Vance approached carefully, his voice controlled, but his eyes shining with alarm. Perhaps we should discuss this privately. There are implications. The implications will be addressed tomorrow. Kieran finally released Thalia's hand, but only so he could position himself beside her in a way that made it clear anyone wishing to reach her would have to go through him first. Tonight, the ritual is concluded. The other claims are made. This ceremony is finished. He turned to Thalia, and for a second his expression softened. So briefly, she almost thought she'd imagined it. Come, he said quietly, meant only for her ears. You don't need to remain here. Thalia wanted to protest, wanted to ask what was happening, why he'd done that, what it all meant. But the words refused to come, trapped somewhere between her throat and the knot of emotions twisting inside her chest. So she simply nodded and let the king guide her out of the hall. Past shocked faces. Past hostile stares. Past Declan, who stood frozen at the edge of the sacred circle, his face drained of all color, watching as his brother led away the woman he'd abandoned. Past Aurelia, whose perfect mask had finally cracked to reveal fury beneath. Past all of it, into corridors that felt different now, longer, darker, filled with shadows that moved at the edges of Thalia's vision as reality tried to catch up with what had just happened. The castle at night was a different creature entirely. Thalia followed Kieran through passages she'd never walked before, up a spiral staircase that seemed endless, past guards who bowed in silent reverence. They walked through an antechamber lined with ancient tapestries depicting battles and conquests she didn't recognize. Then Kieran stopped before a set of double doors made of dark oak, adorned with the royal crest. "These are the chambers reserved for the king's mate," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "You will stay here." "I don't." Thalia swallowed hard, forcing the words out. "I don't understand what's happening." Kieran didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pushed the doors open, revealing rooms that stole Thalia's breath. The space was vast. A sitting area with velvet chairs and a crackling fireplace. A study lined with shelves of books. And through a half-open door, she could glimpse a massive bed covered in white linens. Tall windows overlooked the fortress gardens, and moonlight streamed through them in beams that made everything look unreal, like a dream she might wake from at any moment. "Come in," Kieran said, and there was something almost hesitant in his voice that didn't match the image of the unshakable king. "You're safe here." Thalia crossed the threshold cautiously, feeling like an intruder. Her eyes scanned every detail, the antique furniture, the silk curtains, the soft rugs beneath her feet, searching for something that made sense, something that explained why she was here. Kieran entered behind her, closing the doors. The sound of the bolt sliding into place made Thalia's heart race. "You have no reason to fear," he said, apparently noticing her tension. "Nothing will be imposed on you." She turned to face him. In the glow of the fireplace, Kieran looked different, less the distant king and more human. The shadows softened the hardness of his features, and there was something in his eyes that made Thalia want to step closer instead of away. "Why?" The question finally escaped, carrying all the confusion and pain of the night. "Why did you do that?" Kieran walked to the fireplace, bracing one hand on the stone mantle as he looked into the flames. "Because you didn't deserve to endure another humiliation." "That's not an answer. It's the truth." He turned to face her, and there was an intensity in his gaze that made the air feel heavier. "I watched you grow on those training fields. Watch every fall, every humiliation, every time you stood again when anyone else would have given up. I saw the strength you carry, Thalia. A strength you yourself failed to recognize." He paused, and something shifted in his expression, something older, deeper. "But before that, I watched your parents. I saw your father and mother fight beside mine at the borders. Saw their loyalty, their courage. When they died in service to this realm, it was my father who promised you would never be left unprotected. He brought you to this fortress. And when he fell..." Kieran's jaw tightened. "That promise became mine." Thalia felt something crack inside her chest. For an instant, everything made sense in a way that was almost cruel. "So that's why he feels responsible." "You were watching me," she said. Not a question. An understanding that had been forming for years in all those moments when she'd felt the weight of an unseen gaze. "Yes." Kieran didn't look away, didn't try to soften or explain. "I watched you." "Why?" This time, Kieran hesitated. His expression shifted, not into coldness, but into something harder to hide. "In the beginning," he said at last, "I watched because it was my duty. Because I owed your parents and my own." He drew in a slow breath, as if preparing to cross an invisible line. But over time, it was no longer about responsibility. Thalia's heart quickened. There was something about you I couldn't ignore, Kieran continued, his voice lower now. Something that made me pay attention even when 1,000 other things demanded it. I tried to convince myself it was just admiration, respect for your determination. He stopped, his jaw tightening. But tonight, when I saw you standing there, exposed like that, his hands clenched at his sides. I suspected Declan wouldn't have the courage to claim you. I suspected you would be humiliated again. And I could not allow that. My instinct wouldn't allow me to leave you alone in that shame. He paused, and each word that followed felt weighted with years of restraint. And for the first time in a very long while, I didn't want to fight it.
Thalia didn't know what to say.
Relief, shock, and something she didn't yet dare name washed through her. And now, she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. What happens now? Kieran studied her for a long moment. Now you rest. Tomorrow there will be time for explanations, for facing the council, for dealing with the consequences of what I've done. He walked toward a door leading to another section of the chambers, his own rooms. Thalia realized with a jolt. You will sleep here, he said, pausing at the threshold. I expect nothing from you, Thalia. If there is ever a future between us, it will be by your choice, not by duty or tradition. And then he was gone, disappearing down the quiet corridor, leaving Thalia alone in chambers far too big, far too empty. She stood in the middle of the room, her heart pounding as if trying to escape. Everything had changed in the span of a single evening. Hours ago, maybe minutes, maybe a lifetime, she'd been tense, anxious, waiting for Declan to finally claim her. The prince she thought she loved. The future she thought she wanted. But now she stood here with trembling hands, and she couldn't stop replaying the moment Kieran extended his hand to her. His touch, his gaze, his courage, his certainty. And that spark, that strange, impossible spark that had raced through her when their skin met. What is happening to me? The question rose not as panic, but as vertigo. Her world was turning upside down. Hours ago, she'd feared losing Declan. Now, she feared remembering the king too well. Thalia rested her forehead against the window, struggling to steady her breath. The future was fog before her, uncertain, unpredictable, completely off the path she'd imagined for years. And strangely, it wasn't fear she felt. It was something far more dangerous. Something that felt almost like hope. Chapter 4, Aftermath. The sun had barely risen when the knocking at the door yanked Thalia from a restless sleep. She shot upright, disoriented for a moment to find herself tangled in silk sheets instead of the thin blanket of her old quarters. The events of the previous night came flooding back, Declan's abandonment, Kieran's claim, the chaos that had erupted in the sacred lunar hall. It wasn't a dream. My lady, a female voice came from the other side of the door. The king requests your presence at breakfast. Thalia looked down at the wrinkled dress she still wore and almost laughed at the absurdity of it all. One moment she was nobody. The next, she was expected at the king's table. One moment, she managed to say. When she opened the door, she found Mila standing there with a tray balanced in her hands, water, towels, and what looked like a new dress draped over her arm. I've been assigned to serve you from today forward, Mila said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Her round face held a mix of genuine warmth and barely contained curiosity. The king thought you might want to change before going down. She held up the dress, deep green fabric with a simple cut, but clearly expensive. The king thought of this. The realization felt strange. Declan had never thought about such things. Had never cared whether she had anything to wear, whether she was comfortable, whether she needed anything. The council is already assembled, Mila continued, helping Thalia remove the dress from the night before. They say the discussion started before dawn. The elders are furious. What are they saying? Thalia asked, though part of her didn't want to know. Mila hesitated, her fingers pausing on the ties of the new dress. I shouldn't. Please. Thalia turned to face her. I'd rather know what awaits me. The servant bit her lip, clearly torn between caution and sympathy. They say the king has gone mad, she said at last, lowering her voice. That choosing a woman without a wolf is an insult to the royal lineage. Some counselors are demanding the claim be annulled. Others say that's impossible once it's been made before the sacred circle. Thalia felt her stomach drop. And Prince Declan? Something flickered across Mila's face. Pity, perhaps, or discomfort. The prince withdrew to his chambers after the ritual. They say he hasn't left since. Good, part of Thalia wanted to say. Let him feel a fraction of what I felt. But another part, the part that had loved Declan for 10 years, that still carried the scars of that love like invisible wounds, felt a stab of something that refused to become anger. The hall where royal breakfast was served lay in the eastern wing. When Thalia entered with Mila at her side, she immediately felt the weight of every gaze turned toward her. The table was long, occupied by faces she recognized from the night before, counselors, elders, high-ranking nobles. And at the head of the table sat Kieran. The king rose when she walked in. The gesture was small, almost subtle, but Thalia saw the surprise flash across the faces around the table. Kings didn't stand for anyone.
Thalia.
He indicated the chair at his right, the place of honor, traditionally reserved for the consort.
Sit.
She walked to the chair on legs that didn't seem to belong to her, acutely aware of every gaze tracking her movement, every whisper dying on lips as she passed. When she sat, she could see the faces more clearly. Counselor Vance, with his calculating expression. Elder Thane, still red with indignation. And Aurelia Nightshade. The crimson-haired woman sat on the opposite side of the table, flawless in an ivory dress that made her look like a bride. Her ice-blue eyes met Thalia's, and the smile that curved her lips was as sweet as poison. Thalia, dear. Aurelia's voice sliced through the tense silence. What a charming dress. Green suits you so well. It matches your origins. Thalia opened her mouth to respond, but Kieran was faster. Lady Aurelia. The king's voice was ice-wrapped in silk. As I understand it, you came to this fortress as a guest. Guests uphold certain courtesies, especially toward those who hold places of honor at the royal table. Aurelia's smile faltered. Your Majesty, I was only nothing. Kieran didn't raise his voice, but something in his tone made even the oldest counselors straighten in their seats. Thalia is mine. I chose her. Any disrespect toward her is a direct insult to the king. I trust that it is clear. The silence that followed was so thick Thalia could have cut it with a knife. Aurelia lowered her eyes to her plate, her cheeks flushed crimson. Thalia felt a flicker of satisfaction that she immediately tried to suppress. This wasn't the time for small revenges. Your Majesty. Counselor Vance cleared his throat, seizing the pause to reclaim control of the conversation. We must address the implications of last night. The council has concerns. Concerns. Kieran repeated the word, as if dissecting it. And what would those be? Miss Thalia has never manifested her wolf. Vance spoke with the care of someone walking on broken glass. Tradition is clear. The royal consort must be able to bear strong heirs. Without a wolf. Tradition is also clear about claims made within the sacred circle. Kieran cut in. Once declared, they are irrevocable. Or is the council suggesting that I break ancestral oaths? Vance paled. No, Your Majesty. We merely. Then the matter is settled. Kieran took a sip from his goblet with a calm that contrasted sharply with the tension in the room. Thalia will have every protection and privilege this position grants. Anyone who questions that is questioning my authority as king. Thalia watched the exchange, barely able to believe what she was witnessing. Kieran, the distant king, the quiet ruler she had spent years admiring from afar, was defending her before the entire council.
Publicly.
Without hesitation. It was more than Declan had ever done. The comparison rose in her mind before she could stop it, dragging with it a wave of conflicting emotions. Where Declan made promises in whispers and backed down under pressure, Kieran spoke openly and faced opposition head-on. You deserve someone who is certain. His words in the stable days ago echoed in her mind with new meaning. Excuse me. A familiar voice cut through her thoughts. Everyone turned to the entrance where Declan stood. Thalia felt the air leave her lungs. The prince looked wrecked. His golden hair was tousled, uncombed. Dark circles hollowed his handsome face, and there was a pallor to his skin that spoke of a sleepless night. But it was his gaze when it found hers that struck her like a physical blow. There was pain there, regret, and something else, something that looked dangerously like desperation. Declan. Kieran's voice was controlled, but Thalia could feel the tension radiating from him like heat from a forge. We didn't expect to see you this morning. I need to speak with you. Declan didn't look away from Thalia as he spoke. In private. Whatever you have to say can be said here. It cannot. The prince finally turned to his brother, and there was a challenge in his stance Thalia had never seen before. Unless you want the entire court to hear what I think about what happened last night. The silence was absolute. Kieran rose slowly, the movement loaded with controlled tension that made the muscles in his shoulders look carved from stone. Very well. He turned to Thalia, and for a second his expression softened. Finish your breakfast. Mila will stay with you. Then he walked toward Declan, passing his brother without so much as a glance, expecting the prince to follow. Thalia watched the two of them disappear through the doors, her heart beating in an uneven rhythm. Well, Aurelia broke the silence, the poisonous smile back on her lips. This promises to be interesting. Thalia didn't answer. She only tightened her grip around her goblet until her fingers hurt, and tried not to think about what was happening beyond those walls. The inner gardens were where Kieran came when the weight of the crown became too heavy to bear. The rose bushes his mother had planted decades earlier still bloomed here, crimson and white and gold, a reminder of simpler times when he'd been just a boy who dreamed of becoming a knight instead of a king. But today, even the roses couldn't soothe the storm inside his chest. You've gone insane. Declan's voice cut through the silence the moment the garden doors closed behind them. It's the only explanation. Kieran didn't turn around. He kept his gaze fixed on the flowers, hands clasped behind his back. Insane for doing what you didn't have the courage to do? I was going to claim her. We're going to. Kieran finally turned, and there was something dangerous in his eyes that made Declan step back instinctively. Because from what I saw last night, you left her exposed in front of the entire court. You humiliated her in a way no decent man would, and no prince should. I didn't. Things got complicated. Kieran took a step toward his brother. Though he didn't raise his voice, his presence seemed to fill the entire space. You spent years keeping Thalia close, offering scraps of affection to keep her waiting without ever having the decency to be honest about what you actually wanted. And when the moment finally came to stand by your words, you backed down. As you always do. Declan's face was drained of color. You don't know what you're talking about. I know better than you think. Something old stirred in Kieran's chest, a frustration built over years of watching his brother toy with Thalia's feelings as if they were disposable. I saw it, Declan. Every time you went to her when you were bored and ignored her the moment something more exciting appeared. I saw how she waited for you, how she believed your empty promises. He paused, his jaw tightening, and I saw the look on her face last night when you abandoned her. I didn't abandon her. I just needed more time. Time for what? Kieran's voice dropped to something colder. To decide whether Aurelia's blue eyes were worth more than years of loyalty? Thalia deserves someone who is certain of her. You never were. Declan stayed silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke again, his voice was lower, weighted with emotion Kieran couldn't immediately identify. And you are certain of her? The question hit Kieran somewhere he wasn't expecting. What are you trying to say? I'm saying you appeared out of nowhere and claimed her in front of everyone. Declan stepped closer, accusing him of sharpening his features. You, who never showed interest in anyone. You who rejected every potential match the council presented. Suddenly, Thalia is important enough for you to cause a political scandal. Kieran felt his jaw tighten. That is none of your concern. None of my concern? Declan let out a bitter laugh devoid of humor. You took the woman I intended to claim and say it's none of my concern? You lost her the moment you left her standing alone in that circle. Kieran's voice was sharp as a blade. I didn't take her from you, Declan. You threw her away. The silence that followed was heavier than anger. There was pain there too. The pain of two brothers who had somehow become rivals over something neither fully understood. Do you love her? Declan's question came out almost as a whisper. Kieran didn't answer right away. The truth was he didn't know. What he felt for Thalia was confusing, a mix of protectiveness, admiration, desire, and something deeper he couldn't name. A heavy silence stretched between them before Kieran finally spoke. I respect her. I admire her strength. And our father protected her because he owed that to her parents. He paused, his voice dropping. We inherited that promise, Declan. But you failed. And I had to repair the damage. Declan studied his brother for a long moment, something indefinable crossing his gaze. You've always been like this. Declan's voice emerged low, trembling with fury. The perfect son, the exemplary prince, the unshakable king. He stepped forward, chest rising and falling in uneven breaths. And now you use our father's name just to avoid admitting the truth, that you want her, that you didn't even think for 1 second before claiming the woman I love. Declan. Kieran tried, his voice still controlled. But Declan was no longer listening. He lunged forward, fast, his hand clenched into a fist aimed at his brother's jaw. The movement was brutal, desperate. But Kieran caught the blow midair, his hand closing around Declan's fist like an iron shackle. No hesitation. No visible effort. Just raw strength and absolute authority. They stood face to face, the air between them crackling with something feral. Let go. Declan spat, trying to yank his arm back. Stop. Kieran's voice finally lost its calm. Don't do this. Declan tried to pull free again, but with a firm pivot, Kieran twisted his body, pinning his brother from behind, forearm locked across Declan's chest. The prince snarled, thrashing like a trapped animal. Let go. You will stop only when you think clearly again. Kieran's voice was deep now, heavy, intense. Stop before you do something you cannot undo. Declan tried to break free once more. Kieran tightened just enough to remind him which of them was stronger. Do you know what's really happening to you? Kieran murmured near his brother's ear, his voice cutting.
Pride.
Nothing but pride. Declan froze for a heartbeat. You never saw Thalia for who she truly is, Kieran continued. You never wanted the woman who stood by you for years. You wanted what she represented for your ego, someone who would wait forever while you played at being desirable. Declan was breathing hard, trembling with rage. Kieran released him deliberately, stepping back and letting the prince regain his footing. And that was when he struck with words instead of fists. Tell me, Declan. Kieran lifted his chin, his gaze steady, almost merciless. If I undo what I did, if I annul the claim right now, would you claim her? Declan opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Kieran took another step toward him. And if you did, would it be because you want her? A deadly pause. Or because your pride is wounded? The words cut through Declan like a blade. Without another word, the prince turned on his heel and left, abandoning the king alone among his mother's roses. Kieran remained there for a long time, staring at the flowers without really seeing them. You want her too. Declan's words echoed in his mind, dragging up sensations he'd been trying to suppress for far longer than he cared to admit. He thought of Thalia, on the way she lifted her chin whenever she refused to show weakness, of the spark in her eyes when she knocked down an opponent during training, of how, since the previous night, every time she walked into a room, something in his chest seemed to tighten in a way he couldn't explain. It was unsettling, frightening, and in a way he couldn't begin to understand, it was also liberating. Kieran shook his head, forcing control back into his body. There was a kingdom to govern, a council to pacify, and a confused young woman who depended on him for protection. This was not the time for existential doubts. With one last glance at the roses, he walked back toward the fortress. Back to Thalia. Back to whatever future they were building together, whether either of them understood what it was yet. Chapter 5. Shifting Shadows. Thalia spent the rest of the morning exploring her new chambers, trying to get used to the idea that this space was now hers. It felt wrong somehow, like wearing clothes that belonged to someone else. The velvet chairs were too soft. The books lining the study shelves were bound in leather she was afraid to touch. Even the view from the windows felt like something she didn't deserve. Sprawling gardens where nobles walked in their fine clothes, completely unaware that the wolfless girl was now looking down at them from the king's wing. A sound at the door made her turn. Mila entered carrying a tray with lunch, her round face set in an expression that hovered between worry and barely disguised curiosity. The king sent this. She set the tray on a table near the window. He said you should eat something, and that he will come to see you tonight if you allow it. If you allow it. Even now, even after everything, Kieran still asked for permission. Tell him yes, Thalia said quietly. He can come. The afternoon passed in a haze of thoughts and uncertainty. Thalia tried to read, but the words wouldn't stick. She tried to rest, but sleep wouldn't come. She tried not to think about Declan, about Kieran, about what the future might hold, but it was impossible to think of anything else. When evening fell and shadows began to lengthen across the floor, she found herself standing in front of the mirror again, adjusting a dress Mila had brought her for the 10th time. Her hair was loose, falling in dark waves over her shoulders. The dress was simple but elegant, deep burgundy that made her skin look less pale. She wondered if she was trying too hard, or not hard enough, or if any of it truly mattered. The knock at the door made her jump. Come in. Kieran stepped inside, and Thalia felt the air leave her lungs. The king had traded his formal clothes for something simpler, a dark tunic, riding pants, boots that showed signs of wear. His hair was looser than she'd ever seen it, and without the armor of courtly formality, he looked younger, more approachable, more dangerous.
Thalia.
He stopped a few steps away from her, as if afraid to get too close. I hope I'm not intruding. You're not. She hated how small her voice sounded. I was just waiting. The corner of his mouth lifted, not quite a smile, but the closest thing to one she'd ever seen on him. Waiting for me. You said you would come. I did. He walked to the window, looking out at the moon beginning to rise over the gardens. We need to talk about a few things. About what happens from now on. Thalia moved closer, stopping at his side without touching him. Did the council accept it? The council had no choice. There was a faint note of satisfaction in his voice that didn't match his usually controlled demeanor. The claim was made in the sacred circle. To break it would be sacrilege. None of them would dare commit that. But they're not happy.
No.
Kieran turned to face her, and Thalia realized he was closer than she'd thought. Close enough that she could see flecks of silver in his gray eyes. Many believe I made a mistake. And you? The question came out before she could stop it. What do you believe? Kieran studied her for a long moment, and something in his gaze made her breath catch. I believe I did what was right, he said at last, his voice lower now. I believe you deserve more than what you've been given. Thalia nodded, but something in her chest was still heavy. A question she couldn't swallow. How is it? The words slipped out before she could stop them. The conversation with Declan? Kieran visibly tensed. The change was subtle, a tightening of his shoulders, a clench in his jaw, but Thalia noticed. She always noticed the details others ignored. It was what it needed to be, he answered, his voice losing some of the warmth it had held moments before. Is he all right? The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Kieran stepped away from the window, taking a few strides toward the fireplace. With his back to her, his posture looked like a wall. You're worried about him. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. And there was something in the way he said it, something that sounded like disappointment, that made Thalia's stomach sink. That's not it, she rushed to say, taking a step toward him. You're brothers. I don't want to be the reason for a war between you. I don't want you to fight because of me. Kieran turned slowly. His eyes found hers, and she saw something there she hadn't expected. Vulnerability. It's not because of you, he said quietly. It's because of his choices. His failures. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was carefully controlled, too controlled. But Thalia, Declan made his choices. I made mine. Whatever stands between me and my brother is not something you need to carry. She wanted to argue, wanted to explain that it wasn't about Declan, not really. It was about not wanting to tear a family apart. It was about the guilt she carried for being there, in that room, taking up a place she'd never imagined would be hers. But the words wouldn't come. And Kieran kept looking at her like that, as if he were waiting for something. As if every second of silence confirmed a suspicion he didn't want to have. The disappointment in his eyes was almost tangible. "I should go," he said, already turning toward the door. "You need to rest." Thalia felt panic claw its way up her throat. He was pulling away. He was reading everything wrong. He was thinking she still cared for Declan in a way she no longer did. Not after everything. Not after last night. Not after feeling Kieran's hand in hers and realizing it was different from anything she'd ever known. She moved on instinct. Or maybe it wasn't instinct at all. Maybe it was something that had been growing inside her since the moment he'd stepped down from that throne and walked to her in the middle of the hall. Maybe it was the only way she knew to show what words couldn't carry. Thalia crossed the distance between them in 3 steps. Her hands found his face, the strong line of his jaw, the warmth of his skin beneath her fingers. And before she could think, before she could regret it, she kissed him. For a second, Kieran didn't move. 1 second that felt like an eternity, during which Thalia was certain she'd made the biggest mistake of her life. And then his hands found her waist. The touch was firm. Sure. Almost possessive. He pulled her closer, erasing any space that still existed between them, and answered the kiss with an intensity that stole the breath from her lungs. It wasn't like their first kiss. That had been an impulse, surprise, an unplanned explosion. This was different. Intentional. Deliberate. A wordless declaration. Kieran kissed her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. His hands framed her face with reverence that made her eyes burn. His lips moved against hers with slow, torturous care, savoring every second, every breath, every sound she made. When he pulled back, they were both breathless. Thalia kept her eyes closed for a moment, unable to face what she'd just done. The heat in her cheeks was almost painful, and her heart pounded so hard she was sure Kieran could hear it. She opened her eyes, finding his gaze only inches from hers. "I don't know why I did that." It was a lie. She knew exactly why she'd done it. She just didn't have the courage to say it aloud. Kieran studied her for a long moment. His hands were still on her waist, his body still keeping her close. And there was something in his eyes, something between surprise and a satisfaction he was trying not to show, that made her heart skip a beat. That, he said, his voice rough in a way she'd never heard before, was unexpected. Thalia felt her face burn even hotter.
Sorry.
"I shouldn't have." "Don't apologize." Kieran's grip on her waist tightened slightly. Never apologize for something like that. The air between them was still charged, still electric. Thalia could feel every place his body had touched hers, like invisible marks on her skin. "I should go," Kieran repeated, but this time there was something different in his voice. Something that sounded like reluctance. He stepped back, putting distance between them, but his gaze never left hers.
"You need to rest."
"And I need to think." He walked to the door but stopped before opening it.
"Thalia."
She lifted her eyes to meet him. "This doesn't change anything of what I said before." He looked at her over his shoulder, and there was an intensity in his gaze that made her hold her breath. "If there is something between us, it will be by your choice. Not because of impulse, not out of gratitude, not out of confusion." And then he was gone, leaving her alone with her heart racing and her lips still burning. Thalia leaned back against the wall, sliding down until she was sitting on the floor. Her legs wouldn't hold her anymore. What did I do? She brushed her fingers over her own lips, still feeling the ghost of his kiss. And why do I want to do it again? The weeks that followed were an exercise in confusion and discovery. Thalia was slowly adapting to her new life, to the luxurious chambers, the meals at the royal table, the stares that followed her through every corner of the fortress. Some things had improved. No one dared insult her openly anymore, not with the king's protection hanging over her like an invisible shield. Others had grown worse. The whispers were now more cautious, more poisonous, loaded with resentment that used to be expressed through public humiliation. And then there was Declan. The prince hadn't sought her out once since that morning in the hall. He didn't try to talk, didn't send notes, didn't show up in places she used to frequent. It was as if he'd decided the best way to deal with the situation was to pretend she didn't exist. But Thalia saw him. She saw him walking through corridors with Aurelia at his side, the two speaking in low voices, heads tilted toward each other. She saw them strolling through gardens, Aurelia's hand resting lightly on his arm as she laughed at something he'd said. She saw him during meals, when Declan's eyes would find hers across the table, a flicker of something that looked like regret before turning back to the crimson-haired woman beside him. It was strange. Weeks ago, that sight would have destroyed her, would have ripped pieces of her heart out and scattered them on the floor for others to step on. But now she felt only a distant emptiness, like looking at an old scar and remembering that it once hurt. What kept her awake at night wasn't Declan. It was Kieran. It was the way the king looked at her during meals. Quick glances, discreet, but loaded with something that made her blood rush. It was how he always found an excuse to be near her. In the gardens when she read. In the corridors when she returned from training. In the council meetings where a seat was now reserved for her. It was how sometimes, when no one was looking, he touched her hand for just a second, as if he needed to confirm she was real. They hadn't kissed again. Kieran kept a respectful distance, honoring the words he'd spoken that night. But Thalia could feel the tension between them growing like a rope stretched to its limit. Every shared glance, every accidental touch, every quiet moment added more pressure to something that would inevitably snap. And there was something else. Something Thalia couldn't explain. In recent days, her body has begun to change. Not physically, at least not in any visible way. But there were new sensations, strange and unsettling. Her senses felt sharper. She could hear conversations at distances she shouldn't be able to. She could pick up scents she'd never noticed before. The particular smell of rain before it fell, the distinct musk of different people, the underlying current of emotions in a room. She could feel presence before seeing them. And then there were the dreams. Every night she dreamed of dark forests and full moons. She dreamed of running on four legs, wind in her fur, earth beneath her claws. She dreamed of a massive wolf with silver eyes running beside her. And she woke with her heart racing and a strange sense of loss she couldn't explain. In the third week after the ritual, Thalia woke in the middle of the night certain something was wrong. Not wrong exactly. Different. Her body burned, not with pain but with heat. A heat that seemed to rise from deep within, from a place she couldn't name. Her skin felt sensitive, every brush of the sheets amplified 1,000 times. And there was something else. A presence inside her. Ancient. Powerful. Stirring. Awakening. Pushing to the surface. Thalia sat up, heart hammering. What is happening to me? She stood on shaky legs and walked to the window. The moon was almost full, spilling its silver light across the fortress gardens. And when Thalia looked at it, truly looked, she felt something inside her response. Like a call. A recognition. As if the moon were speaking directly to a part of her that had always been asleep. The door opened behind her. Thalia turned and found Kieran standing in the doorway. He wore sleep clothes, his hair tousled, his expression a mixture of worry and something far more intense. His eyes, glowing faintly in the darkness, swept over her as if searching for wounds only he could sense. I felt you wake, his voice was rough with sleep. My wolf knew before I was fully conscious. Thalia couldn't speak. The heat inside her was rising, and now that Kieran was there, now that she could feel his presence, his scent, the energy radiating from him, everything was sharper, stronger, overwhelming. What is happening to me? She whispered, broken. Kieran approached slowly, each step deliberate, as if walking towards something precious and fragile. Your wolf, he said, stopping a few steps from her. She's waking up. Finally. Thalia's knees buckled, and Kieran caught her before she hit the floor, his arms wrapping around her with a strength that was both protective and possessive. I don't understand. she managed, gripping his shoulders like they were the only solid thing left in the world.
Why now?
After so many years? Kieran guided her back to the bed, helping her sit. He knelt in front of her, holding her hands between his, and there was something in his eyes, something almost reverent, that made her chest tighten. Some wolves need a catalyst to awaken, he explained softly. Something that triggers the deepest instinct. A threat. A trauma. He paused, his thumbs tracing circles on her palms. Or a bond. Thalia's breath caught. A bond. Kieran didn't answer right away. His eyes met hers, and she saw a question there, one he seemed afraid to ask. When I touched your hand during the ritual, he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. Did you feel something? Thalia remembered the moment.
The spark.
The heat. The sense that something inside her had shifted for the first time. Yes, she whispered. I felt it. Something flickered across Kieran's face. Relief, maybe, or hope. My wolf felt it too. He guided her hand to his chest, pressing it over his heartbeat. He recognized something in you. Something that had been sleeping, waiting. What are you saying? Kieran hesitated. The great king who never hesitated before councils or armies, suddenly vulnerable in a way she'd never seen. I'm saying that maybe there was a reason I did what I did that night. A reason beyond protection, beyond duty. He swallowed, and each word that followed felt weighted with years of restraint. I'm saying my wolf may have recognized his mate before either of us understood it. Thalia felt the world stop.
Mate.
The word echoed through her mind, heavy with meanings she could barely process. Mates were legends. Stories told to children about souls destined to find each other. About bonds that transcended choice or logic. She'd never believed in them. How could she, when she didn't even have a wolf? But now a wave of heat tore through her, more intense than anything before. Thalia arched back, a sound escaping her throat, half gasp, half moan, as something inside her, something huge and ancient, finally began to break free. Kieran, she panted, gripping his arms. He held her steady, one hand on her back, the other at her nape, anchoring her as her body was overtaken by waves of transformation. Don't fight it, he whispered against her ear, his own voice strained. Let it happen. Thalia closed her eyes and surrendered. Chapter 6, The Awakening. Pain came first. Not the sharp, immediate pain of a wound, but something deeper, something that felt like her bones were being reshaped from the inside out. Like every cell in her body was remembering what it was supposed to be. Thalia screamed, or maybe she howled. She couldn't tell the difference anymore. Her back arched impossibly, muscles seizing and releasing in waves. Kieran's hands were still on her, steady, grounding, but even that anchor felt distant as the transformation took hold. Breathe, his voice cut through the chaos. Thalia breathed through it. But breathing felt impossible when her lungs were changing shape, when her ribs were expanding, when everything she'd ever been was being torn apart and rebuilt. Heat flooded through her veins like molten silver. Her vision blurred, then sharpened to a clarity she'd never experienced. Colors became more vivid. Shadows gained depth. And the scents, gods, the scents were overwhelming. She could smell everything. The leather of Kieran's boots. The pine soap he'd used. The underlying musk that was uniquely him. The ancient stone of the fortress. The roses in the garden are 3 floors below. Her hands, no, not hands anymore, hit the floor.
Claws.
Black claws that gleamed in the moonlight. Thalia looked down and saw paws where her hands should be. Midnight dark for covering limbs that felt both foreign and achingly familiar. Her perspective had shifted, lower to the ground, but somehow more powerful. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the pain stopped. Thalia opened her eyes, golden now instead of brown, and the world looked completely different. Everything was sharper, clearer, more alive. She could hear Kieran's heartbeat.
Fast.
Too fast. Racing with an emotion she could now sense without words. She could smell his wolf pushing dangerously close to the surface, recognizing what she'd become. I shifted. The thought came with startling clarity, and with it came another presence, distinct yet part of her. Her wolf. Awake at last. The sensation was indescribable. It was like discovering she'd had a twin living inside her all along, sleeping, waiting for this moment. A consciousness that was hers but also separate, ancient, and knowing in ways her human mind couldn't comprehend. "We are complete now," the wolf seemed to say, without words. "We are finally whole."
Thalia.
Kieran's voice was rough, strained, barely controlled. She turned her head, the movement smooth and natural despite the new form, and met his gaze. The king knelt before her, his eyes glowing gold, his own wolf visible in every line of his face. The control he usually wore like armor was cracking, revealing the primal creature beneath. "You're beautiful," he whispered, and there was wonder in his voice. "More than I ever imagined." Thalia's wolf stepped forward, the movement instinctive, and touched her nose to his cheek. An intimate gesture. A claim. Kieran closed his eyes, his breath shuddering. And then she smelled it. The scent hit her with the force of lightning, familiar and impossibly right, like coming home after a lifetime away. Pine and storm and something deeper. Something that called to the most ancient part of her, the part that had been sleeping all these years. Her wolf recognized it instantly, and the truth crashed through her like a tidal wave.
Mate.
Kieran was her mate.
He always had been.
She just couldn't know until her wolf awakened. The bond wasn't a choice or a political arrangement or a duty. It was written in their very essence, woven into their souls before either of them took their first breath. That's why he'd watched her all those years. Why his wolf had strained against his control. Why he'd risked everything to claim her that night in the sacred circle. Some part of him had always known. The shift back was almost as quick as the first. In seconds, Thalia was human again. Naked and trembling on the floor, tears streaming down her face. Whether from joy or shock or the overwhelming rightness of what she'd just discovered, she couldn't tell. Kieran wrapped her in a blanket immediately, pulling her into his arms. He was shaking too, she realized, as if he'd been barely holding himself together. "You felt it," he said, voice breaking. "You know." Thalia looked up at him. The man who had watched her from distances for years, the king who had risked everything to protect her, the mate she'd never known she had. "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered. "I wasn't sure." Kieran brushed a strand of hair from her face, the gentleness making her chest ache. "My wolf suspected. But without your wolf awake, there was no way to know. No way to confirm the bond." He paused, and she saw everything he'd hidden for years in his eyes. The longing, the hope, the fear of losing her before he ever truly had her. "And I couldn't tell you what I felt when you were still waiting for my brother. When your heart still believed it belonged to him." "It never did," Thalia said, the truth of it settling into her bones. "I thought I loved Declan, but I was in love with the idea of being chosen. Of being wanted. It wasn't real love. It was just desperation." She reached up, cupping Kieran's face in her hands. "This," she whispered, feeling the bond humming between them like a living thing. "This is real." Something broke in Kieran's expression, the last wall crumbling. "Say it," he breathed.
"Please."
"I need to hear you say it. You're my mate." The words came out like a vow. "And I'm yours."
Kieran kissed her then.
Not with the careful control of before, but with the hunger of a man who'd waited years. Who'd watched from shadows. Who'd held his wolf back through sheer force of will while it howled for its other half. This kiss was claiming and surrendering all at once. His hands tangled in her hair, tilting her head back to deepen the kiss. Thalia's blanket slipped, forgotten, and Kieran's sharp intake of breath told her he'd noticed.
Thalia.
Her name was a prayer and a warning. "Are you sure? Because if we keep going, I don't know if I'll be able to stop." She answered by pulling him closer, her fingers finding the ties of his tunic. "Then don't stop," she whispered against his lips. "Don't ever stop." What followed was fire and tenderness woven together. Kieran touched her as if learning every inch of her skin, memorizing every curve, every place that made her gasp. His hands were reverent but possessive, gentle but demanding. And Thalia discovered her body knew exactly how to respond, as if this dance had always been written in her bones, waiting for the right partner. When he finally lifted her and carried her to the bed, she felt the bond thrumming between them, a golden thread connecting their souls, letting her feel what he felt. His desire, his love, the overwhelming need to make her his, in every way that mattered. She could feel his wolf, too, recognize the call of hers, the two creatures circling each other in that space between human and beast, acknowledging what had always been true. When they finally joined, Thalia felt the bond complete itself. It was like a silent explosion in her chest, a final click of something locking into place. She could feel Kieran not just with her body, but with her soul, could sense his emotions as clearly as her own. The pleasure, yes, but also the fierce protectiveness, the deep reverence, the love he'd carried for years without knowing where to put it. Mate, her wolf whispered with satisfaction. Mate, his wolf answered. And when Thalia finally fell over the edge into pleasure, she took Kieran with her, the two of them lost in each other, bound together in ways that transcended flesh and time. Thalia woke to sunlight streaming through the windows and the unfamiliar weight of an arm around her waist. For a moment, she was disoriented. Where was she? Why did her body ache in that strange, but not unpleasant way? Why was there warmth pressed against her back? Then the memory returned. The awakening.
The shift.
The bond.
Kieran.
She turned slowly, carefully, and found the king asleep beside her. In the morning light, he looked younger.
Softer.
The lines of worry that usually marked his face had vanished, and there was a faint ghost of a smile on his lips that made Thalia's heart tighten. My mate. The thought still felt surreal, like something from a dream she might wake from at any moment. She, Thalia, the wolfless girl, the soldier everyone despised, was the king's destined mate. As if sensing her gaze, Kieran's eyes opened. For a second, he seemed just as disoriented as she'd been. Then his eyes found hers, and a smile, a real smile, rare and precious, lit his face. Good morning, he said, his voice rough with sleep. Good morning. He lifted his hand and traced the line of her jaw with his fingers, the touch gentle and possessive at once. I thought it had been a dream, he murmured. The best dream I've ever had. Thalia felt heat bloom across her face. It wasn't a dream.
No.
His eyes darkened with something she now recognized as desire mixed with deep satisfaction. It wasn't. He pulled her closer, pressing soft kisses to her forehead, her eyelids, the tip of her nose, gentle kisses, almost reverent, that made Thalia want to laugh and cry at the same time. The council is going to lose their minds, she said, reality beginning to seep into the perfect cocoon of that morning. The council can go to hell. Thalia laughed, a surprised sound that escaped before she could contain it. That's not very king-like of you. I don't care. Kieran propped himself up on an elbow, looking at her with an intensity that stole the air from her lungs. I spent years doing what was expected. Years being the perfect king, the unshakable leader, the man with no weaknesses. He paused, his expression softening. But you are my weakness, Thalia. And for the first time in my life, I don't want to be strong. I don't want to hide what I feel. I don't want to pretend that having you here in my arms isn't the only thing that's ever truly mattered. Thalia felt tears burn behind her eyes. I love you, she whispered, the words coming out like a confession, like a surrender. I think I always have since the first time I saw you watching me. I just didn't know it yet. I love you too. Kieran's voice was rough with emotion. Since the first time I watched you fall on those training grounds and stand back up. Since the first time I heard you answer an insult with your chin held high. Since always. A tear slipped free, running along Thalia's temple until it disappeared into her hair. Kieran smiled, that rare smile that transformed his entire face, and kissed her again. But the kiss was interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. They both froze. Your Majesty? Mila's voice came from the other side, tentative and apologetic. I apologize for the intrusion, but the council has called an emergency session. They're demanding your presence. And she hesitated. They know about Lady Thalia's wolf. Kieran closed his eyes briefly, his jaw tightening.
How?
News travels fast in the fortress, Your Majesty. Someone saw the light in your chambers last night. Saw shadows that looked like wolves. Thalia felt her stomach drop. Of course. Of course they couldn't have one perfect morning without reality crashing back in. Kieran sat up, running a hand through his tousled hair. Tell them I'll be there within the hour, he called out. Yes, Your Majesty. Footsteps retreated down the corridor. Kieran turned back to Thalia, and something fierce burned in his eyes. They're going to try to challenge this, he said quietly. They're going to test you, question you, try to prove you're not worthy of standing beside me. I know, but they won't win. He took her hands in his, holding them tightly. Because you're not just my mate, Thalia. You're my equal. My partner. And I will burn this entire fortress down before I let anyone make you feel less than that. Thalia felt something warm and powerful bloom in her chest. Not just love, but certainty. She had spent years believing she was broken. Years thinking she wasn't enough. But she'd been wrong. She wasn't broken. She'd just been sleeping, waiting for the right moment to wake. Let's go face them, she said, squeezing his hands. Together. Kieran's smile was fierce and proud. Together. An hour later, they stood before the council. Thalia wore a dress of deep blue, the king's colors, her hair braided in a crown around her head. She stood tall, shoulders back, every inch the warrior she'd always been. But now there was something else. A power that radiated from her like heat from a forge. The power of her awakened wolf. The power of the mate bond connects her to the most powerful alpha in the realm. The council chamber was packed. Elders lined the walls. Nobles whispered in clusters. And at the center of it all sat Elder Thane, his wrinkled face set in lines of deep disapproval. Your Majesty, he began, his voice dripping with false courtesy. We must address this development. What development? Kieran's voice was calm, but edged with steel. Reports say that Lady Thalia manifested her wolf last night, under highly irregular circumstances. There is nothing irregular about a wolf awakening. Kieran stood beside Thalia, close enough that their shoulders touched, a united front. It happens when it happens. But the timing is none of your concern. Elder Thane's face flushed red. Your Majesty, we have a right to verify. Verify what? Kieran took a step forward, and even the boldest counselors leaned back instinctively. That my mate has her wolf? Very well. She can shift right here, right now, and settle this once and for all. The chamber fell silent. Every eye turned to Thalia. She felt the weight of their stares, the skepticism, the hope that she would fail and prove them right. But she also felt Kieran's presence beside her, solid and unwavering. I felt the bond between them, warm and strong. Felt her wolf stirring beneath her skin, ready. Showing them. The wolf seemed to whisper. Show them what we are. Thalia closed her eyes and called her wolf forward. The shift was smoother this time, faster. She'd done it once. Her body remembered the path. Pain flashed through her, then heat, then the strange sensation of bones reshaping and muscles expanding. Her dress tore. She'd forgotten about that, but she didn't care. When she opened her eyes, golden and wild, she was seeing the chamber from a wolf's perspective, and the silence was absolute. Thalia knew her wolf form was striking. Kieran had told her as much, his voice filled with awe. But seeing the reactions now, seeing jaws drop and eyes widen, and even Elder Thane stumble backward, she understood for the first time what she'd become. Her fur was midnight black, glossy and thick. Her size was massive, nearly as large as the most imposing alpha males, far larger than any she-wolf should be. But it wasn't just her size that made the entire chamber hold its breath. An old man stepped forward from the crowd, a sage she'd seen arrive at the fortress weeks earlier. The one who'd asked for an audience with Kieran and said cryptic things about choices and wisdom. His eyes were wide with something that looked like reverence. "Ancient blood," he whispered. But in the silence of the chamber, everyone heard it. "By the gods," he continued, stepping closer as if drawn by some invisible force. "She carries ancient blood, the bloodline of the first wolves." The murmur that followed rolled through the chamber like thunder. Ancient blood, the first wolves, the lineage that went extinct centuries ago. Thalia didn't fully understand what it meant, but she could see on the faces around her that it was something monumental. Something that changed everything. Elder Thane looked as if he'd swallowed poison. His face flickered between red and pale as he struggled to process what he was seeing. This is impossible, he finally managed. The ancient bloodline died out. "Apparently not," Kieran said, and there was an almost predatory satisfaction in his voice. He moved to stand beside Thalia's wolf form, one hand resting on her head in a gesture that was both protective and possessive. "Thalia's parents came from the Forgotten North," he continued, his voice carrying through the chamber. "From old villages that preserved traditions forgotten by the rest of the realm. The lineage was sleeping inside her, waiting for the right catalyst to awaken." His eyes swept across the council, challenging anyone to speak. "Do you still believe I made a mistake?" No one answered. One by one, the council members bowed their heads. The nobles followed suit. Even the elders, some reluctantly, others with what looked like genuine respect, bent their knees. The wolfless girl everyone had despised was now the most powerful she-wolf in the kingdom. Thalia shifted back, and Kieran immediately wrapped her in his cloak, shielding her as she caught her breath. "Thalia carries the blood of legends," the old sage said, his voice filled with wonder. "The gods themselves have blessed this union." Kieran's arm came around her shoulders, solid and warm. "Any other concerns?" he asked the council, his tone making it clear there had better not be. Silence. "Then this session is concluded." Kieran turned, guiding Thalia toward the doors. "My mate and I have more important things to attend to." As they walked out, past the bowing nobles, past the shocked elders, past the councillors already recalculating their political positions, Thalia caught a glimpse of movement at the back of the chamber.
Declan.
The prince stood partially hidden behind a pillar, watching. There was no anger in his expression, no arrogance, none of the haughty pride she'd grown used to over the years. There was only emptiness, a deep, devastating emptiness that made something inside Thalia tighten despite everything. Their eyes met across the crowd. And for a moment, just a moment, she saw the boy who had offered his hand to her when she was 12. The boy who had smiled and made her believe she could be special. But that boy was gone. Had been gone for a long time, perhaps forever. Declan turned and left the chamber without looking back. Thalia watched him go, aware that this was truly the end. The end of the girl who had loved a prince who never deserved her. The end of waiting for crumbs when she deserved a feast. Kieran's hand found hers. Warm, steady, absolutely present. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. Thalia looked at him. Her mate.
Her king.
The man who had seen something in her long before she could see it herself. And felt a certainty she'd never felt before. "I am," she said. "For the first time in a very long time, I truly am." Chapter 7. Coronation of the Heart. The days following Thalia's public shift transformed the atmosphere of Silvercrest Fortress like spring melting winter ice. Where once she'd walked through corridors accompanied by whispers and hostile stares, now people bowed. Servants who had ignored her now rushed to assist. Guards who had deliberately struck her during training now offered respectful nods from safe distances. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt strange, like wearing someone else's skin. "You're brooding again." Cora's voice cut through Thalia's thoughts. The young noblewoman had appeared beside her in the garden where Thalia had come to escape the suffocating attention inside the fortress. Cora had a talent for materializing out of nowhere, and Thalia had grown to appreciate her blunt observations. "I'm not brooding. I'm thinking." "Same thing." Cora sat on the stone bench beside her, uninvited as always. "Let me guess, you're wondering why everyone suddenly treats you like you matter now that you have a wolf, when nothing else about you has changed. Thalia blinked, startled by how accurately Cora had read her thoughts. Something like that. It's because people are simple, Cora said, plucking a blade of grass and twirling it between her fingers. They need visible proof of power before they can see worth. Your worth was always there, in your skill, your determination, your refusal to break despite years of abuse. But they couldn't see it until it came wrapped in fur and ancient bloodlines. She turned to look at Thalia directly. The question is, can you see it now? Before Thalia could answer, a familiar presence made the air feel heavier, charged with an energy she was learning to recognize. Kieran emerged from the fortress doors, his eyes scanning the gardens until they found her. Even from a distance, she felt the pull, the mate bond humming between them like a plucked string. That's my cue to disappear, Cora said, standing. Try not to do anything too scandalous in the rose bushes. The gardeners are already traumatized from last week. We didn't. Thalia felt her face burn. Nothing happened in the rose bushes. Not yet. Cora's grin was wicked as she slipped away, passing Kieran with an exaggerated bow that made the king's lips twitch with suppressed amusement. He settled onto the bench beside Thalia, close enough that their shoulders touched. The simple contact sent warmth flooding through her, the bond responding to proximity, always seeking connection. You left the council meeting early, he said quietly. I needed air. Listening to Elder Thane argue about ceremonial protocols for an hour makes me want to shift and bite something. Kieran's laugh was low and genuine, a sound she heard more often now, but still treasured each time.
He does have that effect.
Though I notice he's been significantly quieter since you demonstrated exactly what you could bite. Thalia smiled despite herself. Elder Thane had indeed become considerably more subdued after witnessing her wolf form up close. What were they arguing about this time? Kieran's expression shifted, becoming more serious. He took her hand, threading his fingers through hers in a gesture that had become natural between them. The coronation ceremony. Thalia's stomach dropped. What coronation ceremony? Yours. His thumb traced circles on her palm, a soothing gesture he developed, as if he could sense her anxiety through the bond. You're my mate, Thalia. That makes you queen. The ceremony is just formality. Just formality? Thalia pulled her hand back, standing abruptly. Kieran, I'm a soldier. I spent my entire life being told I was worthless. And now you want to put a crown on my head and expect me to what? Roll beside you? Make decisions that affect thousands of lives? Yes. His answer was simple, certain. He stood and moved toward her, but didn't try to touch her, giving her space while making his position clear. That's exactly what I expect. Because you're not the same person who believed those lies about being worthless. Aren't I? The words came out sharper than she intended. A few weeks ago, I was cleaning training equipment and sleeping in servants' quarters. Now I'm supposed to be queen? How does that make sense? It makes sense, Kieran said quietly, because the crown doesn't make the person, Thalia. The person makes the crown. You've been leading your entire life. Every time you stood up after being knocked down, every time you refused to let cruelty break you, every time you chose strength over surrender. That's what makes a true leader. He took a step closer, his storm gray eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. And you're not alone in this. You have me. You have advisors. You have time to learn. His voice softened. But more than anything, you have yourself, the woman who survived things that would have destroyed anyone else. Trust her. I do. Thalia felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. What if I fail? Then we fail together. Kieran closed the distance between them, cupping her face in his hands with infinite gentleness. And then we get up and try again, just like you've always done. He pressed his forehead to hers, and through the bond, she felt his absolute certainty, his unwavering belief in her that was so strong it almost hurt. The ceremony is in 3 days, he murmured. I need you to say yes, Thalia. Not because tradition demands it, but because I need my partner beside me. Because this kingdom needs the strength you carry, even if you don't see it yet. Thalia closed her eyes, breathing in assent. Pine and storm and home. 3 days. 3 days to become someone she'd never imagined she could be. Okay, she whispered. Yes. She felt Kieran's relief through the bond like a physical thing, warm and overwhelming. Thank you, he breathed against her hair. Thank you. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparations that made Thalia's head spin. Seamstresses appeared with fabrics and colors she couldn't name, taking measurements while discussing necklines and trains and other things she didn't understand. Counselors briefed her on protocols and traditions, their voices blending into an incomprehensible drone. Mila helped her practice walking with grace instead of the efficient stride of a soldier, a task that proved surprisingly difficult. You're marching to war, not walking to a coronation, Mila said for the 10th time, watching Thalia across the chamber. Softer steps. Let the dress flow. The dress weighs more than my armor used to. How is it supposed to flow? With practice, my lady. Thalia groaned, but tried again. Through it all, Kieran remained close, a steady presence that kept her grounded. He'd slip into her chambers between meetings, stealing moments just to hold her, to let the bond settle the anxiety that kept threatening to overwhelm her. How did you do this? She asked one evening, curled against his chest as they sat before the fireplace. When did you become king? Bad at first. His hand stroked through her hair in soothing repetitions. I was barely 20 when my father fell. Too young, too unprepared. I made mistakes, gods, so many mistakes. But I had good counselors who guided me, and I learned that leadership isn't about being perfect. It's about making the best decision you can with the information you have and accepting the consequences. That's terrifying. It is. He pressed a kiss to her temple. But it's also liberating in a way. Once you accept that you'll make mistakes, you stop being paralyzed by the fear of them. You just try, learn, grow. Thalia tilted her head to look up at him. And if the mistakes hurt people? Then you apologize, make amends, and do better next time. His eyes held hers, serious and honest. The worst leaders are the ones who refuse to admit they were wrong. The best ones are the ones who own their failures and work to fix them. She studied his face, the strong jaw, the storm-gray eyes that had watched her for years, the lines of worry that marked him as someone who carried heavy burdens. You're a good king, she said softly. I'm trying to be. He smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. And you'll be a good queen. I promise. On the night before the coronation, Thalia couldn't sleep. She stood at the window, watching the moon, nearly full now, cast silver light across the gardens below. Her wolf stirred restlessly beneath her skin, feeding off her anxiety. Tomorrow changes everything, she thought. Tomorrow I stop being just Thalia and become something else. The door opened quietly behind her. She didn't need to turn to know it was Kieran. She could feel him through the bond, sense his presence like warmth against her back. Can't sleep? He asked, moving to stand beside her. Too many thoughts. Want to share them? Thalia was quiet for a moment, trying to put the tangled mess of emotions into words. What if they never really accept me? She finally said. What if they always see me as the wolfless girl who got lucky? What if I'm not actually strong enough to do this? Kieran turned to face her, his hands coming to rest on her shoulders. Thalia, look at me. She did, meeting those storm-gray eyes that had become her anchor. They don't have to accept you, he said, each word deliberate. You're not doing this for their acceptance. You're doing this because you're my mate, my equal, my partner. Because you carry ancient blood and strength they can't even comprehend. Because you've already proven yourself 1,000 times over. You just never received the recognition you deserved. His hand slid up to frame her face. And if anyone questions your right to stand beside me, they'll answer both of us. To the king who chose you, and to the queen who earned her place through blood and determination long before a crown ever touched her head. Thalia felt something in her chest loosen, a knot of anxiety she'd been carrying for days. How do you always know what to say? I don't. He smiled, that rare expression that transformed his entire face. I just know you. And I know that the woman who faced down trained soldiers without a wolf, who survived years of cruelty without breaking, who stood in that sacred circle with dignity even as she was being humiliated, that woman can face anything. He leaned down, pressing his forehead to hers in that gesture of intimacy they'd developed. You're already a queen, Thalia. Tomorrow, we will just make it official. She kissed him then, soft and slow, pouring gratitude and love and trust into the connection between them. When they finally pulled apart, she felt steadier, stronger. Stay with me tonight? She asked. I don't want to be alone. I wasn't planning on leaving. Kieran's smile turned slightly wicked. Though I should warn you, if I stay, we probably won't be sleeping much. Good. Thalia took his hand, leading him toward the bed. I'm tired of being nervous. Distract me. As my queen commands. And he did distract her. Thoroughly and completely. Until the anxiety faded and there was only the two of them, connected by bond and body and hearts that had finally found where they belonged. The morning of the coronation arrived with fanfare that seemed to shake the fortress walls. Thalia woke to sunlight streaming through the windows and the sound of trumpets announcing the day. Kieran was already gone, pulled away by duties and preparations, but she could feel him through the bond, steady and calm, lending her his strength. Mila appeared with a small army of servants, all carrying pieces of what would become Thalia's coronation attire. The dress was breathtaking. Deep midnight blue, almost black, that seemed to absorb light and reflect it back as starlight. Silver thread traced patterns across the bodice that matched the ancient runes from the sacred circle. The sleeves were long and fitted, the neckline high and regal, and the train flowed behind like liquid shadow. The king designed it himself, Mila said as she helped Thalia into the gown. He worked with the seamstresses for weeks to get every detail right. Thalia's throat tightened. Of course he had. Kieran, who carried the weight of an entire kingdom, had taken time to design her dress. When she was finally ready, hair braided in an intricate crown, dress fitted perfectly, a thin silver circlet resting on her brow temporarily until the true crown would be placed, Thalia barely recognized herself in the mirror. She looked like a queen. Powerful. Regal. Strong. Perfect. Mila breathed, her eyes misty. You look perfect, my lady. The coronation ceremony took place in the great throne room, the largest chamber in the fortress, capable of holding 1,000 people. And it seemed every single one of those 1,000 spaces was filled. Thalia walked down the long aisle between rows of nobles, elders, soldiers, and common folk who had been granted entrance to witness history. Every eye was on her. But this time the stares held respect instead of disdain, wonder instead of mockery. Cora stood near the front, offering an encouraging smile. Sage Elias nodded with approval. Even some of the guards she'd trained with looked proud. But it was Kieran who held her attention. The king stood before his throne, dressed in formal black with the royal crest emblazoned in silver across his chest. His dark hair was tied back, revealing the sharp planes of his face and eyes that tracked her every step with an intensity that made her blood warm. Through the bond, she felt his pride, his love, his absolute certainty that she belonged exactly where she was. When she finally reached the dais, Kieran extended his hand, palm up, fingers open, in an echo of that moment in the sacred circle when everything had changed. Thalia placed her hand in his, and the rightness of it sang through her bones. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of ancient words and ritual gestures. Elder Thane, looking considerably less hostile now, performed the rites with appropriate solemnity. The crown was brought forward on a velvet cushion, delicate silver shaped like intertwining wolves, set with stones that caught the light like captured stars. Thalia of the northern bloodlines, the elder's voice rang through the chamber. Do you accept the responsibility of queenship? To serve this realm with wisdom, to protect its people with strength, to rule alongside your mate with honor? Thalia's voice came out clear and strong, surprising even herself. I accept. Kieran took the crown, and instead of letting the elder place it, he lifted it himself, a break in protocol that made several counselors gasp. But the king ignored them, his eyes holding Thalia's as he gently settled the crown on her head. "You were always a queen," he said softly, meant only for her ears. "Now everyone else knows it too." The chamber erupted in applause. Genuine, thunderous, celebratory. And as Kieran pulled her into his arms, kissing her before the entire assembled court in a display of affection that would have been scandalous weeks ago, Thalia finally understood what he'd been trying to tell her all along. The crown didn't make her worthy. She'd always been worthy. The crown just made it impossible for anyone to deny. Chapter 8. Shadows of the Past. The celebration following the coronation lasted well into the night. The great hall blazed with light from 1,000 candles, their flames reflected in goblets of wine and the jewels adorning noble throats. Musicians played melodies that made even the most reserved elders tap their feet. Tables groaned under the weight of roasted meats, fresh bread, honeyed fruits, and delicacies from every corner of the realm. Thalia sat beside Kieran at the high table, the crown still feeling foreign on her head despite hours of wearing it. She'd lost count of how many people had approached to offer congratulations, some genuine, others clearly calculated. She was learning to distinguish between the two, reading the subtle tells in their eyes and voices. "You're doing well," Kieran murmured, his hand finding hers beneath the table. The touch was grounding, reminding her she wasn't alone in this. "I feel like I'm acting in a play where everyone knows the script except me." "That's because you are." His lips quivered with amusement. "Court politics is nothing but performance. The trick is deciding which parts of yourself you show and which you keep hidden." "And which do you show?" "Depends on who's watching." He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that made several nearby nobles exchange knowing glances. "But with you? Everything. Always everything." The warmth that spread through Thalia in those words had nothing to do with wine. A movement at the far end of the hall caught her attention. Through the crowd of dancing couples and conversing groups, she caught a glimpse of crimson hair. Aurelia Nightshade. The woman stood near one of the pillars, her ice-blue eyes fixed on the high table with an expression that made Thalia's wolf bristle with instinctive wariness. The predatory smile that had been Aurelia's trademark was gone, replaced by something colder. Harder. "She's still here," Thalia said quietly. "I thought she would have left by now." Kieran followed her gaze, his expression darkening slightly. "She requested permission to stay through the winter season. Technically, I can't refuse without cause. Her father is a powerful duke, and denying hospitality would be a political insult." "Even though her only reason for being here was to manipulate your brother?" "Especially because of that." Kieran's jaw tightened. "The Eastern courts play long games, Thalia. Aurelia failed in her primary objective, but that doesn't mean she's given up. She's looking for another angle, another way to gain influence here." As if sensing their attention, Aurelia's gaze shifted to meet Thalia's directly. For a moment, the two women stared at each other across the crowded hall, predator to predator, each assessing the threat the other posed. Then Aurelia smiled, raised her goblet in a mocking salute, and disappeared into the crowd. "I don't trust her," Thalia said. "Good. You shouldn't." Kieran squeezed her hand. "But she can't hurt you now. Your queen, protected by law and bond and blood. She'd be a fool to try anything." "And if she's fool enough?" Something dangerous flickered in Kieran's eyes, the wolf rising close to the surface. "Then she'll learn why it's unwise to threaten what belongs to the king." The possessiveness in his voice should have annoyed her. Instead, it sent a shiver of entirely different feelings down her spine, and from the way Kieran's nostrils flared slightly, he'd caught the shift in her scent. "Careful," he murmured, his voice dropping to that rough timbre that meant his control was slipping. "Or I'll drag you out of this celebration right now. Crown and propriety be damned." "Promises, promises," Thalia whispered back, surprised by her own boldness. Kieran's sharp intake of breath told her she was playing with fire. Before either could act on the tension crackling between them, Counselor Vance approached the high table, bowing deeply. "Your Majesties, forgive the interruption, but there's a matter that requires the king's attention." Kieran's expression shifted instantly from heated desire to cool command. What matters? A messenger from the Western Territories has arrived. He says it's urgent. Reports of unusual wolf activity near the border settlements. Thalia felt Kieran's hand tighten on hers briefly before he released her. Already standing. Show him to the council chamber. I'll be there shortly. Vance bowed again and departed. Kieran turned to Thalia, frustration and duty warring in his expression. I'm sorry. I have to. Go. She touched his arm, offering a small smile. The kingdom can't wait just because we're having a celebration. I understand. This is why you'll be an excellent queen. He pressed a quick kiss to her forehead, then lowered his voice. Don't let Aurelia corner you while I'm gone. If she approaches, keep Cora or Mila nearby. I can handle myself. I know. But humor me anyway. And then he was gone, striding from the hall with the purposeful gait of a king addressing a crisis. Thalia remained at the high table, acutely aware of how exposed she suddenly felt without Kieran's presence beside her. The celebration continued around her. Nobles dancing, servants refilling goblets, musicians playing, but she felt separate from it all, like watching through glass. Quite the performance. Thalia turned to find Aurelia standing beside the high table, close enough that no one else would overhear their conversation. The woman had moved with the silence of a hunting cat. Lady Aurelia. Thalia kept her voice neutral, channeling the diplomatic tone she'd been practicing. Are you enjoying the celebration? Oh, immensely. Aurelia's smile was all edges. It's fascinating, really. Watching a soldier play at being queen. Tell me, do you even know which fork to use for fish? Or are you still eating with your hands when no one's watching? The insult was delivered with such sweetness it took a moment for the venom to register. Thalia felt her wolf stir, responding to the challenge. But she forced herself to remain calm, to remember what Kieran had said about court politics being performance. I know enough, she said evenly. And what I don't know, I'll learn. That's the advantage of being willing to admit ignorance. It leaves room for growth. How pragmatic. Aurelia leaned closer, her voice dropping. But growth takes time, doesn't it? And in that time, mistakes can be made. Embarrassments can occur. A queen who doesn't know the intricacies of noble protocol can become a liability to her king. Is there a point to this conversation, Lady Aurelia? Or are you simply trying to salvage your wounded pride? Aurelia's mask slipped for just a second, fury flashing in her ice-blue eyes before the sweet smile returned. I'm simply offering friendly advice. Court can be treacherous for those who don't know how to navigate it. One wrong move, one social misstep, and you could find yourself isolated, undermined, questioned. She straightened, smoothing her crimson dress with deliberate elegance. But I'm sure you'll manage. After all, you've proven quite adept at surviving in hostile environments. The question is whether you can do more than just survive. Aurelia swept away before Thalia could respond, leaving behind the faint scent of expensive perfume and veiled threats. That woman is poison wrapped in silk. Thalia turned to find Cora approaching, 2 goblets of wine in hand. She offered one to Thalia, settling into the seat Kieran had vacated. How much did you hear? Enough to know she's planning something. Cora took a sip of wine, her sharp eyes tracking Aurelia's path through the crowd. Women like her don't lose gracefully. She came here expecting to snag a king, settled for corrupting a prince, and ended up with nothing. That kind of failure demands revenge. Kieran says she can't hurt me now. Kieran is a powerful king, but a man nonetheless. He doesn't fully understand how women like Aurelia operate. Cora turned to face Thalia directly. She won't attack you with swords or obvious plots. She'll use whispers, rumors, social manipulation. She'll make you look incompetent, unworthy, out of your depth. Death by 1,000 cuts, each one too small for the king to address directly. Thalia felt a chill despite the warmth of the hall. How do I fight that? By being better than she expects. Cora's expression was serious now, all traces of her usual humor gone. Learn faster. Adapt quicker. Make allies among the nobles, real ones, not just people afraid to offend the king. Show them you're not just Kieran's mate, but a queen in your own right. That's easier said than done. Most worthwhile things are. Cora clinked her goblet against Thalia's. But if anyone can do it, it's the woman who survived being wolfless in a fortress full of predators. You've been fighting this battle your whole life, Thalia. Now you just have better weapons. The celebration finally wound down near midnight. Nobles began departing, offering elaborate bows and flowery congratulations that all blurred together. Servants cleared tables while musicians packed their instruments. Kieran returned looking tired and troubled, the crease between his brows deeper than usual. Is everything all right? Thalia asked as they finally escaped to the privacy of their chambers. Reports are concerning but not immediate. He began removing his formal attire with jerky movements that betrayed his frustration. There's been unusual wolf activity in the Western Territories, packs moving in strange patterns, some reports of violence that don't fit normal territorial disputes. Do you think it's a threat? I don't know yet. It could be nothing, natural migration, conflicts over prey. Or it could be something more organized. He shrugged off his tunic, revealing the muscled planes of his torso. I'm sending scouts to investigate. We should know more within a week. Thalia moved behind him, her hands finding the tight muscles of his shoulders. She began kneading gently, feeling the tension slowly release under her touch. Kieran groaned softly. Where did you learn to do that? Years of treating my own sore muscles after training. When you can't afford a healer, you learn to manage pain yourself. He turned suddenly, pulling her into his arms. The movement was possessive, almost desperate, as if he needed to confirm she was real and his. I hate leaving you alone in situations like tonight, he murmured against her hair. Especially with vultures like Aurelia circling. She approached me after you left. Thalia felt him stiffen. Made veiled threats about me not knowing court protocol. Suggested I'd become an embarrassment to you. That woman. Kieran's voice went cold. I should send her back to the Eastern courts.
No.
Thalia pulled back to look at him. That would make it seem like I need you to fight my battles. Like I can't handle noble politics on my own. You shouldn't have to handle it alone. I'm not alone. I have Cora helping me navigate court dynamics. Mila teaches me protocols. And you. She cupped his face in her hands. But I also need to prove, to myself more than anyone, that I can stand on my own. That I earned this crown through more than just being your mate. Kieran studied her face, and she saw the internal struggle, the protective instinct of both man and wolf warring with respect for her autonomy. You're right, he finally said. But if Aurelia crosses a line, then I'll handle it. And if I can't, I'll ask for help. I promise. He pulled her close again, and she felt his acceptance through the bond, reluctant but real. How did I get so lucky, he whispered. To find a mate who's not only strong but wise enough to know her own mind. You claimed me when no one else would. I'd say luck goes both ways.
No.
Kieran tilted her chin up, his eyes serious. I claimed you because my wolf recognized what my human mind already knew, that you were the only woman I'd ever want. The only one worthy of standing beside me. That wasn't luck, Thalia. That was destiny. He kissed her then, and all thoughts of Aurelia and court politics and distant threats dissolved into heat and need and the overwhelming rightness of being in his arms. Later, when they lay tangled together in the darkness, Thalia's head resting on Kieran's chest, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear, she felt a contentment she'd never known existed. Kieran? Do you ever regret it? Claiming me that night? The political complications it caused. His hand, which had been tracing lazy patterns on her back, stilled. Never. His voice was fierce despite the late hour. Not once. Not for a single second. He shifted so he could look at her properly, his storm-gray eyes visible even in the dim moonlight filtering through the windows. You are the best decision I ever made. The only one that truly mattered. Thalia felt tears prick her eyes. Happy tears this time, not the painful ones she'd shed so often before. I love you, she whispered. I love you too. My queen. My mate, my Thalia. She drifted to sleep in his arms, feeling safe and cherished and certain that whatever challenges tomorrow brought, they would face them together. What she didn't know, couldn't know, was that in a distant chamber of the fortress, Aurelia Nightshade sat writing a letter by candlelight, her pen scratching poison onto parchment with every word. And in the shadows even further beyond, in the western territories Kieran's scouts had yet to reach, something ancient and dangerous was stirring, drawn by the awakening of bloodlines long thought extinct. The celebration was over, but the true tests were only beginning. Chapter 9. Trials of a Queen. The first real test came 3 days after the coronation. Thalia stood in the council chamber, surrounded by a semicircle of nobles and advisors who watched her with varying degrees of skepticism. Kieran sat to her right, close enough to offer support but deliberately not intervening, letting her handle the situation on her own. The issue at hand seemed simple on the surface, a dispute between two merchant families over trading rights in the Eastern markets. But Thalia was quickly learning that nothing in court politics was ever simple. Your Majesty, the first merchant, a portly man named Garveth, bowed with exaggerated deference that barely concealed his condescension. Surely you can see that my family's claim predates House Morven's by 3 generations. The law is clear. The law, countered Lady Morven, a sharp-eyed woman in expensive silks, also stipulates that trading rights can be forfeited through neglect. House Garveth hasn't maintained active trade in those markets for nearly a decade. Because House Morven's thugs have been sabotaging our shipments. Prove it. The argument devolved into accusations and counter-accusations, voices rising as both parties try to talk over each other. Thalia felt the eyes of the council on her, waiting to see how the new queen would handle her first real dispute. She could feel Kieran's steady presence through the bond, not interfering, but silently encouraging. Trust yourself, that presence seemed to say. Thalia raised her hand, and to her surprise, both merchants fell silent immediately. The gesture of authority had worked. I've heard enough, she said, keeping her voice calm but firm. House Garveth, you claim historical precedent. House Morven, you claim active use. Both have merit under different interpretations of the law. She paused, letting the silence stretch, while she organized her thoughts. Cora's advice echoed in her mind. Be decisive. Show you've considered all angles. Don't apologize for your decisions. Here is my judgment. The Eastern market trading rights will be split. House Garveth maintains rights to textiles and metals, which align with their historical trades. House Morven receives rights to foodstuffs and livestock, which reflect their current active commerce. Both merchants started to protest, but Thalia continued, her voice hardening slightly. Furthermore, any evidence of sabotage or interference between your houses will result in complete forfeiture of trading rights to the aggrieved party. The Crown does not tolerate merchants who damage the realm's economy with personal feuds. She looked at each merchant in turn, channeling every ounce of authority she'd learned from watching Kieran. Do I make myself clear? Yes, Your Majesty, they both mumbled, looking distinctly unhappy but unable to argue with the logic of her decision. As they filed out, Thalia caught Councillor Vance, watching her with an expression that might have been approval. Elder Thane still looked skeptical, but several other council members were nodding thoughtfully. When the chamber finally cleared, Kieran stood and crossed to her, pride radiating through the bond. That was well done, he said quietly. Solomon himself would have been impressed. You think so? I felt like I was floundering. You weren't. You listened to both sides, found the core issues, and created a solution that addressed both claims while protecting the realm's interests. He took her hands in his. That's exactly what a good ruler does. Lady Morven looked like she wanted to stab me. Lady Morven always looks like that. She's actually pleased. She got more than she expected. Thalia allowed herself a small smile. Maybe she could do this after all. But the victories were balanced by challenges that cut deeper. That evening, Thalia attended her first formal dinner as queen, a carefully orchestrated affair where noble ladies gathered to discuss matters of court over delicate foods and poisonous gossip. She'd been warned by Cora that these gatherings were battlefields of a different sort, where reputations were built and destroyed with carefully placed words. Remember, Cora had coached her earlier. They'll test you. Try to make you feel inferior. The trick is to never show weakness, but also never be overtly aggressive. Think of it as a dance where everyone's trying to make everyone else trip. Thalia had faced armed opponents with more confidence. The dinner was held in one of the fortress's smaller but more elegant chambers. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over a table laden with foods so artfully arranged they seemed too beautiful to eat. A dozen noble ladies sat around it, including Thalia's heart-sank Aurelia Nightshade. "Your Majesty," Lady Isolde simpered as Thalia entered. The woman who had tormented her for years now wore a mask of false sweetness. "How wonderful that you could join us. We were just discussing the upcoming winter ball. I'm sure you have such creative ideas, given your unique background." The emphasis on unique was subtle but unmistakable. "I'm certain Her Majesty has been too occupied with actual governance to concern herself with party planning," Cora interjected smoothly, appearing at Thalia's elbow. "Unlike some of us who have nothing but free time." A few ladies tittered nervously. Thalia took her seat at the head of the table, trying to remember everything Mila had taught her about which utensils to use when. The conversation started innocuously enough, discussions of weather, fashion, harmless court gossip. But Thalia could feel the undercurrent, the way certain ladies exchanged meaningful glances, the pauses that felt loaded with unspoken judgment. "Tell me, Your Majesty," Aurelia said sweetly, cutting into her perfectly arranged pheasant. "How are you finding the adjustment to court life? It must be quite different from sleeping in the servants' quarters." The table went silent. Thalia felt her wolf bristle at the challenge, but she forced herself to remain calm. This was exactly the kind of provocation Cora had warned her about, designed to make her lose composure or seem defensive. "It is different," Thalia agreed mildly, meeting Aurelia's ice-blue eyes directly. "I've gone from serving those who contributed nothing to actually making decisions that matter. Quite an improvement, I find." Several ladies poorly disguised their laughter as coughs. Aurelia's smile tightened. "Of course. Though I imagine the ceremonial aspects must be challenging. So many protocols to remember, so many ways to make unfortunate mistakes. Fortunately, I'm a quick learner." Thalia took a deliberate sip of her wine, pleased to note her hand didn't shake. "I've had to survive in environments where people wished me dead. Court politics seems almost gentle by comparison." "How rustic," Lady Isolde interjected. "But surely you must feel overwhelmed at times? Perhaps the king should consider appointing advisors to help guide you through more complex matters." Thalia understood the implication immediately, that she wasn't capable of handling her duties without constant supervision. "The king already has advisors," she said evenly. "As do I. But I prefer to make my own decisions rather than becoming a puppet for others' agendas. I'm sure you understand." The barb landed. Lady Isolde had a reputation for being manipulated by her father's political schemes. Well, Cora murmured approvingly beside her. "Our queen has claws." The dinner continued with slightly less hostility after that, though Thalia remained acutely aware of Aurelia watching her like a cat watches a mouse it plans to toy with later. When the ordeal finally ended and Thalia escaped to her chambers, she felt exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical exertion. "How was it?" Kieran asked, looking up from the reports he'd been reviewing. "Exhausting. Confusing. Like fighting an enemy I can't see." Thalia collapsed into a chair, not caring that her carefully arranged hair was coming loose. "How do you deal with this every day?" "Practice. And the knowledge that court games, while tedious, are preferable to actual warfare." He set aside his papers and came to kneel beside her chair. "But you did well, didn't you? I can feel it through the bond." "I didn't stab anyone or cry, if that's what you mean." "That's exactly what I mean." His smile was warm. "The first formal dinner is always the worst. They were testing you, seeing if you'd break. You didn't. That matters." Thalia ran her fingers through his hair, finding comfort in the simple gesture. "Aurelia is planning something. I can feel it." "Let her plan." As long as she doesn't act, there's nothing we can do without evidence. He pressed a kiss to her palm. But I have faith in you, Thalia. You're stronger than she realizes. The next challenge came from an unexpected direction. 2 weeks after the coronation, Thalia was reviewing supply reports with Mila when a young servant appeared at the door, looking nervous. Forgive me, Your Majesty, but there's someone at the gates asking to see you. She says she's your aunt. Thalia's world tilted. My aunt? Yes, Your Majesty. She claims to be your mother's sister. From the northern villages. Thalia's hands went numb. She'd thought all her family was gone, her parents killed in service, no other relatives surviving the harsh northern winters and constant conflicts. Where is she? The guards have her waiting at the main gate. They weren't sure. Thalia was already moving, Mila hurrying to keep up. Your Majesty, shouldn't you inform the king first? There are protocols. Later. If this woman is truly my family, I won't leave her waiting like a beggar at the gates. She found Kieran in the training yards, supervising a group of new recruits. His head snapped up the moment she appeared, sensing her agitation through the bond. Thalia? Someone claiming to be my aunt just arrived. From the north. Understanding flashed across his face. He immediately dismissed the recruits and fell into step beside her. Do you know anything about her? My mother mentioned a sister once, but I was young. I don't remember much. They reached the main gates to find an older woman waiting, flanked by nervous guards. She wore the practical furs and weathered leathers of the northern villages, her face lined by harsh weather and harder years. But when she saw Thalia, her eyes, the same shade of brown as Thalia's own, filled with tears. Little Thalia, she breathed. Gods above, you look just like your mother. Something in Thalia's chest cracked open. Aunt Bronte. The name came from somewhere deep in childhood memory, a laughing woman who had visited once when Thalia was very small, bringing honey cakes and stories of wolves who ran with the northern winds. You remember. Bronte took a step forward, then stopped, seeming to realize she was addressing royalty. Your Majesty, forgive me. I came as soon as I heard. The news reached our village that Myra's daughter had become queen, that her wolf had awakened with the old blood. Tears were streaming down the older woman's weathered face now. I had to see for myself. I had to know if it was true. Thalia looked at Kieran, who nodded slightly, giving permission. She closed the distance and embraced her aunt, breathing in the scent of pine smoke and winter air that reminded her achingly of early childhood. Of her mother. Come inside, she said, her voice thick.
Please.
Come inside, and tell me about my mother, about where I came from. As they walked toward the fortress, Bronte between them, Thalia felt something she hadn't realized she'd been missing, a connection to her past, to the family she'd thought was lost forever. But she didn't notice the way Bronte's eyes took in every detail of the fortress with unusual sharpness for a simple northern villager. Didn't catch the quick glance the older woman exchanged with someone in the gathered crowd, a glance that held calculation rather than joy. And she certainly didn't see Aurelia Nightshade watching from a high window, a satisfied smile curving her crimson lips. Sometimes the greatest dangers came wrapped in familiar faces and spoke with the voices of those we'd longed to find. That evening, as Bronte settled into guest quarters and Thalia prepared for bed, Kieran pulled her aside. Something feels off, he said quietly. What do you mean? Your aunt. The timing of her arrival. The fact that she found her way here alone when the northern villages are weeks of dangerous travel away. Thalia felt defensive instinct rise. She's family, Kieran. My only family. I know, and I want that to be genuine. He cupped her face in his hands. But as king, I've learned to be suspicious of convenient timing. Promise me you'll be careful. That you won't share anything sensitive until we can verify her story. You think she might be lying? I think the appearance of a long-lost relative 2 weeks after you become queen is worth investigating. His eyes were serious. I'm not saying she's not who she claims to be. I'm saying we should be certain before we trust completely. Thalia wanted to argue. Wanted to believe that finally Finally, she had someone who connected her to her parents, to her past. But she'd also learned to trust Kieran's instincts. All right, she agreed reluctantly. I'll be careful. Thank you. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. I hope I'm wrong. I hope she's exactly who she says she is. But until we know for certain, I understand. As they settled into bed that night, Thalia stared at the ceiling, her mind spinning with questions. Was Bronte truly her aunt? Or was this some elaborate scheme, another move in court games she was only beginning to understand? And if it was a deception, who was behind it? Through the bond, she felt Kieran's concern mirroring her own, his protective instincts on high alert. Neither of them slept well that night. In her guest chambers, Bronte stood at the window, looking out at the moonlit gardens. Her weathered fingers touched a small amulet hidden beneath her furs, a communication device from the Eastern courts, where a certain crimson-haired lady waited for reports. She trusts too easily, Bronte whispered to the moon. This will be simpler than promised. But the moon kept its secrets, and in the darkness, pieces were moving across a board that grew more complex with each passing day. The game for Thalia's crown, and perhaps her life, had truly begun. Chapter 10. Poison and Truth. The following days passed in a strange duality. On the surface, everything seemed peaceful. Bronte settled into fortress life with surprising ease, charming servants and nobles alike with stories of the harsh northern territories and the old ways still practiced there. She spent hours with Thalia, sharing memories of her mother, small details that rang true, like Myra's habit of humming while she worked, or how she'd always braided lavender into her hair. Each detail felt like a gift. A piece of the past Thalia had thought lost forever. But beneath the surface, something felt wrong. Thalia couldn't pinpoint exactly what bothered her. Maybe it was the way Bronny's eyes sometimes went sharp and calculating when she thought no one was watching. Or how she asked questions that seemed innocuous, but always circled back to matters of state, guard rotations, council politics, the king's schedule. Or maybe it was simply Kieran's persistent unease bleeding through the bond, his wolf remaining on edge despite finding no concrete evidence of deception. She knew about the scar on my shoulder, Thalia said one evening as she and Kieran prepared for bed. The one I got falling from a tree when I was 6. How would she know that if she wasn't really my aunt? Letters? Stories your mother shared before she died. Kieran suggested, though his tone made it clear he wasn't convinced. Information can be gathered, Thalia, especially by those who want to deceive. You still don't trust her. I don't trust the timing. He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her waist from behind as they stood before the window. A convenient relative appears just as you're finding your footing as queen? When someone like Aurelia is looking for ways to undermine you. It's too perfect. Thalia leaned back against his chest, drawing comfort from his solidity. What if I'm being paranoid? What if she really is my aunt, and I'm pushing away the only family I have left because of court politics? Then we'll discover that, and you can rebuild that relationship. Kieran pressed a kiss to her temple. But it's better to be cautious now than regret later. A knock at the door interrupted them. Your Majesties? Mila's voice was urgent. Forgive the intrusion, but there's been an incident in the kitchens. Kieran was already moving, his expression shifting to the alert focus of a ruler facing a potential crisis. Thalia followed, her heart racing. They found the kitchen in chaos. Servants crowded around something on the floor while the head cook, a formidable woman named Edith, stood with her arms crossed, face thunderous. What happened? Kieran demanded. The crowd parted to reveal a young kitchen girl lying on the stone floor, trembling and pale. A broken bowl lay beside her, its contents spilled across the tiles. A rich, dark sauce meant for the evening meal. Mara collapsed after tasting the queen's dinner, Edith said, her voice tight with barely controlled fury. She tests all the royal meals before they're served. Started convulsing within minutes. Ice flooded Thalia's veins. Poison. Looks like it, Your Majesty. Edith's jaw clenched. Someone tampered with your food. Kieran's hand found Thalia's, gripping tight. Through the bond, she felt his rage, Cold and controlled, but absolutely devastating. Get the healers for Mara, he ordered. Then seal the kitchens. No one enters or leaves until we determine how this happened. Sage Elias arrived within minutes, immediately tending to the stricken girl. He worked in grim silence, administering herbs and tinctures while murmuring incantations Thalia didn't recognize. Will she live? Thalia asked quietly. If I'm right about the poison, yes. Elias didn't look up from his work. Nightshade extract, deadly in large doses, but she only got a taste. She'll be sick for days, but she'll survive. Nightshade, Kieran repeated, and something dark flickered across his face. Thalia's mind raced. Nightshade. Like Aurelia's surname. Could it be that obvious? Is that deliberate? I want every person who had access to the kitchens today questioned, Kieran commanded. And someone found Lady Aurelia.
Now.
They found Aurelia in her chambers, calmly embroidering by candlelight as if she hadn't a care in the world. Your Majesty, she greeted Kieran with a perfect curtsy when guards escorted her to the council chamber. To what do I owe this unexpected honor? Someone poisoned the Queen's dinner tonight. Kieran's voice was ice. With nightshade extract. How terrible! Aurelia's expression was appropriately shocked, but her eyes held a glimmer of something else. Amusement? I do hope the perpetrator is caught and punished severely. Where were you this afternoon? In my chambers mostly. Reading and corresponding with my father about affairs in the Eastern courts. She tilted her head, ice-blue eyes wide with false innocence. Surely you don't think I had anything to do with this, Your Majesty? The poison shares your family name. That seems like quite the coincidence. Nightshade is a common poison, Your Majesty. Available in any apothecary. Using it hardly implicates me specifically. She turned her gaze to Thalia. Though I suppose when one is paranoid about enemies, one sees conspiracies everywhere. Thalia felt her wolf surge forward, wanting to shift, to show this woman exactly what happened to those who threatened her. But Kieran's hand on her shoulder grounded her. You will remain in your chambers under guard until this matter is resolved, he said coldly. If we find any evidence connecting you to this poisoning. You won't. Aurelia's smile was serene. Because I had nothing to do with it. But by all means, waste your time investigating me while the real culprit remains free. After she was escorted away, Thalia turned to Kieran. She did it. I know she did. Probably. His jaw was tight. But she's right. We have no proof. And she's too clever to have left any. So, she just gets away with trying to kill me? For now. Kieran pulled her into his arms, and she felt his fear through the bond, the terror of how close he'd come to losing her. But I'm doubling your guard. Nothing you eat or drink will go untested. And I'm having every one of Aurelia's movements tracked. She'll just find another way. Let her try. His voice dropped to a growl. The next time she makes a move, I'll have grounds to send her back to the Eastern courts in disgrace. I'm done being diplomatic. But the poison attempt, it turned out, was only the opening move. 2 days later, Thalia was reviewing territorial maps with Councillor Vance when Bronte appeared at the study door. Niece, might I have a word? In private. Vance glanced at Thalia, who nodded. The councillor gathered his materials and departed, leaving them alone. What is it, Aunt Bronte? The older woman's expression was troubled as she closed the door. I've heard disturbing rumors. About you and the king. Thalia felt her guard rise immediately. What kind of rumors? That the mating bond might not be genuine. That perhaps your wolf awakened through artificial means. Dark magic, some are whispering. That's ridiculous. Is it? Bronte moved closer, her voice dropping. Think about it, Thalia. Your wolf was dormant for over 20 years. Then suddenly, the moment the king claims you, she awakens? That's convenient. Almost too convenient. The bond triggered the awakening. That's how it works sometimes. Or someone wanted you to believe that. Bronny's eyes were intent now, boring into Thalia's. What if the king used dark magic to force your wolf to surface? To make you believe you're mates when you're not? It would explain why he was so insistent on claiming you despite having no prior interest. Thalia's head spun. The words were poisonous, designed to plant doubt. But why would her aunt? Unless she wasn't her aunt at all. Who put you up to this? Thalia asked quietly. Bronte blinked, her mask slipping for just a second. I don't know what you—
Who put you up to
this? Thalia stood, her wolf rising close to the surface. You're not my aunt, are you? My real aunt would never try to turn me against my mate. You're being paranoid. Guards. 2 guards appeared immediately at the door. Escort Lady Bronte to a secure chamber. She's not to leave or communicate with anyone until the king, and I can question her properly. You're making a mistake, Bronte said, but her voice had lost its warm, familial tone. Now it was cold, calculating. You have no proof of anything. We'll see about that. After Bronte was escorted away, Thalia sank into her chair, her hands shaking. Kieran burst into the study moments later, having felt her distress through the bond. What happened? Bronte. Thalia's voice cracked. She tried to convince me you used dark magic to fake our bond. To make me think we're mates when we're not. Understanding dawned on Kieran's face. She's working with Aurelia. It's the perfect strategy. Make you doubt the bond, question your place here. If you become uncertain, vulnerable, easier to manipulate or remove. But the bond is real. I can feel it, feel you every moment. I know, love. I know. He pulled her close. But doubt is a powerful weapon. Plant enough seeds, and even the strongest certainty starts to waver. Thalia buried her face in his chest, breathing in a scent, pine and storm and home. The bond hummed between them, warm and solid and undeniably real. What do we do now? Now we make them think their plan is working. Kieran's plan was simple but risky. They would let Aurelia and whoever else was involved believe that Bronte's words had achieved their goal, that Thalia was beginning to doubt, to pull away from Kieran, that the bond between them was weakening. It meant public arguments, cold silences at meals. Thalia sleeps in separate chambers. It meant acting like her heart was breaking when in reality, the bond between them only grew stronger. I hate this, Thalia whispered that night, lying alone in guest quarters while Kieran was in their actual chambers. They were still connected through the bond, but the physical distance felt wrong. So, do I? His voice came through their mental link, warm despite the separation. But if they think they're succeeding, they'll get careless. Make mistakes. Give us the evidence we need to prove their conspiracy. And if they don't, then we'll find another way. But Thalia, no matter what happens, no matter what you see or hear in the coming days, remember this. You are my mate. My queen. My everything. That will never change. I love you. I love you too. Now try to sleep. We have a performance to give tomorrow. The performance began at breakfast. Thalia arrived late, deliberately avoiding Kieran's eyes. When he tried to speak to her, she gave only short, cold responses. Around them, nobles exchanged knowing glances. The whispers started immediately. Trouble in the royal marriage. Perhaps the bond wasn't as strong as they claimed. The queen looks unhappy. By midday, the rumors had spread through the fortress like wildfire. And in her guarded chambers, Aurelia smiled. That evening, Bronte requested an audience with Thalia, granted under careful supervision. I can help you, Bronte said earnestly, playing her role perfectly. If the bond was artificially created, there are ways to break it. To free you. Free me, Thalia repeated, letting skepticism color her voice. To what end? To choose your own path. Do not be bound to a man who manipulates you. Bronte leaned forward. You deserve better than this, Thalia. You always have. And I suppose you know people who can help? Break this supposed false bond. I might. Bronte's eyes gleamed. For the right price. For your cooperation on certain matters. What matters? Information. About the king's plans. His weaknesses. The security of the fortress. Bronte's mask slipped further. My employers would pay handsomely for such details. There it was. The confession Kieran had been waiting for. Your employers in the Eastern Courts? Thalia asked softly. Bronte froze, realizing her mistake. The door opened, and Kieran strode in with guards flanking him. Thank you, he said coldly, for confirming what we suspected. You're not Thalia's aunt. You're a spy, sent by the Eastern Courts, specifically by Lady Aurelia's family, to infiltrate this fortress and destabilize the crown. Bronny's face contorted with fury. You have no proof. We have your confession. Witnessed and recorded. Kieran gestured to a corner where a court scribe had been hidden, transcribing every word. More than enough to charge you with espionage and attempted regicide. He turned to the guards. Take her to the dungeons. And bring Lady Aurelia. She has some explaining to do. Aurelia was harder to break. Even confronted with Bronny's confession, the crimson-haired woman maintained her innocence with practiced ease. I know nothing of this woman's schemes, she insisted, her ice-blue eyes never wavering. If she mentioned my family, it was without our knowledge or consent. I am as shocked as you are, Your Majesty. Your family name appears on 3 separate letters we found in her chambers, Kieran said coldly, all discussing plans to undermine the Queen and destabilize the throne. Forgeries. Anyone could write letters and claim they came from House Nightshade. It went on for hours. Aurelia deflecting, denying, offering plausible explanations for every piece of evidence. Finally, Thalia spoke up. Let her go. Everyone turned to stare at her. Your Majesty? Vance looked shocked. We can't prove her family's direct involvement, Thalia said calmly. And she's right. The evidence is circumstantial. We have enough to charge Bronte, but not enough to implicate House Nightshade without causing a political incident. She turned to Aurelia, letting her wolf show in her eyes, gold bleeding through brown. But I want you to leave this fortress by dawn. Return to the Eastern Courts and tell your father this. Any further attempts to undermine this throne will be considered an act of war. And I promise you, Lady Aurelia, you don't want to see what I become when my kingdom is threatened. For the first time, genuine fear flickered across Aurelia's perfect features. As you wish, Your Majesty. Her curtsy was stiff, her voice tight. I'll depart immediately. After she was escorted out, Kieran looked at Thalia with pride and concern mixed together. You're letting her go? We can't prove enough to hold her without political consequences, Thalia said. But now she knows we're onto her schemes. And her presence here was always about manipulation. Remove that tool, and she has no power. You're learning, Kieran said with approval. Sometimes the smartest move is letting your enemy think they escaped when really, you've removed their ability to do harm. That night, they finally returned to their shared chambers, the charade over. Kieran pulled Thalia into his arms the moment the door closed, holding her as if she might disappear. Never again, he muttered against her hair. I'm never sleeping apart from you again. Plots be damned. Agreed. Thalia clung to him, feeling the bond settle back into its natural rhythm now that they were together. Though we should probably expect more attempts. The Eastern Courts won't give up just because Aurelia failed. Let them try. Kieran pulled back to look at her, his eyes fierce. They don't understand what they're dealing with. You're not the uncertain girl they thought to manipulate. You're a queen. My queen. And you're stronger than all of them combined. He kissed her then, deep and claiming and full of all the fear and relief and love he'd been holding back during their forced separation. And Thalia kissed him back, letting him feel through the bond that no amount of poison or lies or manipulation would ever shake what they had. The Eastern Courts had tried to break them. They'd failed. And in the process, they'd only made Thalia stronger. Chapter 11. The Gathering Storm. Winter settled over Silvercrest Fortress like a heavy cloak, bringing with it snow that turned the world white and cold winds that howled through the stone corridors. But inside the fortress walls, a different kind of cold had taken hold. The reports from the Western Territories had grown increasingly alarming. What had started as unusual wolf pack movements had escalated into coordinated attacks on border settlements. Livestock slaughtered, homes burned, And most disturbing of all, witnesses reported wolves moving with unnatural purpose, as if following orders rather than instinct. 3 more villages raided in the past week, Kieran said, studying the map spread across the council table. Red markers indicated attack sites, forming a pattern that made Thalia's stomach twist. They're moving systematically, targeting settlements with minimal defenses. Could it be rogue packs? Elder Thane suggested, though his voice lacked conviction. Perhaps driven from their territories by harsh winter? Rogue packs don't coordinate attacks across 50 miles of territory, Councillor Vance countered. This is organized. Deliberate. Thalia leaned over the map, her newly awakened wolf instincts picking up on something the others seemed to miss. They're circling, she said quietly. Look at the pattern. Each attack is slightly closer to Silvercrest. They're not random raids. They're testing our defenses, learning our response times. Every eye turned to her. The Queen is right, Kieran said, pride evident in his voice despite the grim situation. Someone is using these packs to gather intelligence. The question is who? The Eastern Courts? Vance suggested. Possible, but this doesn't match their style. They prefer political manipulation to open warfare. Kieran's jaw tightened. This feels like something older, more primal. A chill ran down Thalia's spine that had nothing to do with winter cold. What if it's connected to my bloodline? She asked. The sage said I carry ancient blood. What if something from the old times has awakened, drawn by the return of that power? The council chamber fell into uncomfortable silence. Elder Thane was the first to speak, his wrinkled face gravely. The ancient bloodlines were said to have enemies. Creatures that predated the organized packs. Feral things that remember when wolves ran wild without law or king. Ferals are legends, Vance protested. Stories to frighten children. So were wolves carrying ancient blood, Sage Elias interjected from his position at the far end of the table. The old healer had become a regular presence at council meetings since Thalia's coronation, until one manifested before our eyes. Perhaps we should stop dismissing legends so quickly. Kieran looked at Thalia, and through the bond, she felt his concern, not for himself, but for her. If these attacks are connected to the ancient bloodlines, he said slowly, then Thalia might be their ultimate target. All the more reason to send forces to the Western Territories immediately, Vance urged. Crush these packs before they can organize further.
No.
Thalia's voice cut through the discussion. If I'm the target, sending armies away from Silvercrest leaves the fortress vulnerable. We'd be doing exactly what they want, spreading our forces thin. But we can't simply ignore. We don't ignore. Thalia straightened, feeling the weight of the crown on her head and rising to meet it. We send a strike force, small, elite, capable of moving quickly. They investigate, gather intelligence, and eliminate immediate threats. Meanwhile, we fortify defenses here and prepare for the possibility that this is the opening move in a larger assault. She looked around the table, meeting each counselor's eyes. We don't react with predictable aggression. We respond with strategic precision. Kieran's pride through the bond was almost overwhelming. The Queen's plan is sound, he declared. I'll lead the strike force myself.
No.
Thalia's hand found his. You're needed here. The fortress needs its king, and... She hesitated, then pushed forward. If something happens to me, the kingdom needs you alive to hold it together. Thalia. I'll go. The council erupted in protests, but Thalia raised her voice over them. I'm not the helpless wolfless girl anymore. My wolf is awakened. I've trained as a warrior my entire life. And if these attacks are truly connected to my bloodline, then I need to face them. Absolutely not, Kieran said flatly. I won't risk you. You don't get to make that choice. Thalia turned to face him fully, her wolf rising behind her eyes. I'm not just your mate, Kieran. I'm queen. I don't send others to face dangers I won't face myself. Through the bond, she felt his anguish. The war between respect for her autonomy and desperate need to keep her safe. Then we go together, he said finally. The kingdom can't afford to lose both monarchs to an ambush in the Western Territories. And I can't afford to lose you at all. The raw emotion in his voice silenced the council. These were not words spoken by a king to a subject, but by a mate to his other half. What if? Cora's voice came from the doorway where she'd been silently observing. You both go, but with a force large enough to ensure safety while small enough to maintain speed. 20 elite warriors. The king and queen together, showing strength and unity. You investigate the attacks while leaving sufficient forces to defend Silvercrest under Counselor Vance's temporary command. Vance looked like he might protest being left behind, but Kieran spoke first. It's a compromise I can accept. But Thalia, he turned to her, his eyes intense. You follow my commands in the field. Your courage is admirable, but I have decades of combat experience. Agree to that, or I veto this entire plan. Thalia wanted to argue, but she recognized the offer for what it was, him respecting her need to act while exercising his duty to protect. Agreed. Your commands in the field. But the strategic decisions we make together. Together, he echoed, and sealed it with a brief kiss that made several counselors cough uncomfortably. They departed 3 days later, 20 of the fortress's best warriors mounted on horses bred for winter travel. Thalia wore practical leather armor over warm furs, her hair braided back in the warrior's style she'd worn for years. The crown stayed behind, but she carried something more important, Kieran's trust and her own awakened power. The journey to the Western Territories took 2 days of hard riding through snow-covered forests and frozen plains. At night, they camped in tight formations, guards posted at all hours. Kieran insisted Thalia share his tent, and she didn't argue, both because she wanted to be near him and because it allowed them to discuss strategy privately. You're quiet, she said on the second night, watching him stare into the small brazier that provided their only heat. I'm worried. He didn't try to hide it. Everything about this situation feels wrong. The timing, the coordination, the targeting. It's like pieces of a puzzle I can't quite see the shape of. Thalia moved to sit beside him, their shoulders touching. What does your instinct tell you? That we're walking into something larger than raids and territorial disputes. His hand found hers, threading their fingers together. That someone or something has been planning this for a long time, and that the awakening of your bloodline was the trigger they were waiting for. Comforting. Despite the tension, he managed a small smile. I'm not trying to comfort you. I'm trying to prepare you. Whatever we find in the Western Territories, I need you to promise me something. What? If I give you an order to run, to shift and flee, you do it. No arguments, no hesitation. You survive, even if I don't. Kieran, promise me. His eyes were fierce now, almost desperate. I can face anything knowing you're alive, but I can't function if I'm worried about your safety. Promise me, Thalia. She wanted to refuse. Wanted to say they would survive or fall together. But she recognized the fear beneath his command, the terror of losing his mate. I promise, she said quietly. But the same applies to you. If the situation reverses, you run. You survive. The kingdom needs its king. The kingdom needs its queen. Then we both better make sure we come home. They sealed the promise with a kiss that turned heated despite the cold, despite the danger, despite everything. Being together, even in a freezing tent in hostile territory, felt more right than anywhere else. They reached the first raided village at midday. Nothing could have prepared Thalia for the devastation. Homes reduced to charred skeletons, bodies, or what remained of them, scattered across frozen ground. The snow was stained red in patterns that spoke of systematic slaughter rather than frenzied attack. Gods, one of the warriors breathed. Kieran's face was carved stone, but Thalia felt his rage through the bond, cold and controlled, but absolutely devastating. Spread out, he commanded. Look for survivors' tracks, anything that tells us what happened here. They searched through the ruins, and with each discovery, the horror deepened. Claw marks that were too large, too deep. Bite patterns that didn't match normal wolf attacks. And strangest of all, symbols carved into remaining walls, primitive and unsettling. "Your Majesty," one of the warriors called from the edge of the village. "You need to see this." They found tracks leading into the forest, dozens of them, all heading in the same direction. But these weren't normal wolf prints. They were massive, malformed, as if the creatures that made them were twisted versions of what wolves should be. "Ferals," Sage Elias said quietly. He'd insisted on joining the expedition despite his age, claiming knowledge of the old ways might be needed. The legends were true. They're real. "What are ferals?" Thalia asked, though part of her didn't want to know. "Wolves that rejected civilization," Elias explained, his weathered face grim. "When the first kings unified the packs under law, some refused. They fled into the wild places and over generations devolved, lost their humanity, became creatures of pure instinct and rage. We thought they'd died out centuries ago." "Apparently not," Kieran said darkly. "The question is why they've suddenly returned, and who's commanding them." "Ferals can't be commanded," Elias protested. "They're mindless beasts." A howl cut through the air. Not a normal wolf's howl, but something wrong. Too deep, too ragged, filled with madness and hunger. It was answered by dozens more from the forest around them. Defensive formation.
Kieran barked.
Around the queen, warriors scrambled into position, forming a protective circle around Thalia and Kieran. But even as they moved, shapes began emerging from the trees. Wolves. But not like any Thalia had ever seen. They were massive, easily twice the size of normal wolves, with matted fur and eyes that glowed with unnatural light. Their bodies moved wrong, joints bending at angles that shouldn't be possible. And their mouths. Oh gods, their mouths were too large, filled with teeth that seemed to go on forever. "Hold," Kieran commanded as the creatures began to circle. "Wait for my signal." Thalia's wolf surged forward, recognizing these things as abominations. Everything in her screamed to shift, to fight, to defend her pack. But she held back, trusting Kieran's experience. The ferals circled closer, their movements coordinated despite their apparent madness. And then Thalia saw something that made her blood run cold. At the edge of the clearing, a figure stood watching. Humanoid but wrong. Wrapped in furs and bones, face hidden behind a mask made of wolf skulls. The figure raised one hand, and the ferals froze. "They are commanded," Thalia whispered. The figure's head turned toward her, and even from a distance, she felt the weight of its attention like a physical thing. When it spoke, the voice was wrong, layered, as if multiple throats were speaking in unison. "Ancient blood awakens. The old debt comes due. The first wolves will rise again, and the false kingdoms will fall." "Who are you?" Kieran demanded, his hand on his sword. "I am the voice of the forgotten, the herald of what was and will be again." The figure's attention remained fixed on Thalia. "She carries what was stolen, what was lost. Blood of the first wolves, daughter of the old ways. She must return what is ours." "I don't know what you're talking about," Thalia said, her voice steadier than she felt. "You will remember. When the moon runs red and the ancient places wake, you will remember and you will choose." The figure lowered its hand. "Until then, let this be a message. The old powers are rising, and no crown, no king, no kingdom of law can stop what is coming." The figure melted back into the forest, and with a final chorus of those wrong howls, the ferals followed. Silence fell over the clearing, broken only by heavy breathing and the pounding of hearts. "What in all the hells was that?" one of the warriors finally asked. "Trouble," Kieran said grimly. "The kind that makes political conspiracies look simple." He turned to Thalia, and she saw fear in his eyes, not for himself, but for her. "We need to get back to Silvercrest.
Now.
Whatever this is, whatever they want with your bloodline, we need answers. And we need them fast." But as they mounted their horses and began the hard ride home, Thalia couldn't shake the figure's words. She carries what was stolen. What had she inherited from her ancient bloodline? What debt was she supposed to pay? And what choice would she be forced to make when the moon ran red? Through the bond, she felt Kieran's determination. He would protect her from this threat, whatever it cost. But some part of Thalia knew that protection might not be enough. Some debts could only be paid by the one who carried them. And whatever was coming, it was coming for her. Chapter 12. Blood Moon Rising. They rode through the night, pushing the horses hard despite the treacherous winter conditions. Behind them, the Western Territories seemed to pulse with malevolent energy, as if the land itself had awakened to something dark and ancient. Thalia barely slept during the brief stops they took to rest the horses. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the skull-masked figure and heard those layered voices echoing in her mind. She carries what was stolen. Talk to me, Kieran said quietly during one rest stop, finding her standing apart from the others, staring at the night sky. I can feel your turmoil through the bond. I don't know what they want from me. Thalia wrapped her arms around herself, though the cold she felt had nothing to do with winter. My parents never mentioned any debt. Never told me about ancient powers or stolen legacies. They were just warriors, loyal soldiers who died serving your father. Maybe they didn't know. Kieran moved behind her, his arms coming around to share his warmth. If the bloodline was dormant for generations, the knowledge might have been lost, or deliberately hidden to protect their descendants. Some protection. Thalia leaned back against him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. Now I'm a target for things I don't understand, carrying a debt I never agreed to pay. Then we find answers. His voice was firm, resolute. Elias knows the old legends. We have archives in Silvercrest that haven't been fully explored. And if necessary, we send them to the northern villages where your parents originated. Someone must know the truth about your bloodline. And if the truth is worse than the mystery? Kieran turned her to face him, his storm-gray eyes intense in the moonlight. Then we face it together. Whatever this debt is, whatever these ancient powers want, you're not alone in this, Thalia. You're my mate, my queen, and I will stand between you and anything that tries to harm you, even if it's destiny itself. She kissed him then, pouring gratitude and love and fear into the connection. When they finally pulled apart, she felt steadier, stronger. We should keep moving, she said. The sooner we reach Silvercrest, the sooner we can start finding answers. They arrived at the fortress gates 3 days after leaving, exhausted and covered in road dust. Counselor Vance met them in the courtyard, his expression grave. Your Majesties, thank the gods you've returned safely. We've had developments during your absence. What kind of developments? Kieran demanded, already moving toward the keep. Reports from the Northern Territories. Villages there are experiencing the same attacks as the West. And Vance hesitated. There have been signs. Phenomena. Speak plainly, Vance. The moon, your majesty. Last night it appeared red. Blood red. The elders say it's an omen. That ancient magic is stirring. Thalia felt ice flood her veins. When the moon runs red, gather the council, Kieran ordered, and send for every scholar, sage, and historian in the fortress. If there's knowledge about ancient bloodlines and old debts anywhere in our archives, I want it found.
Now.
The council chamber was packed with more than just the usual advisors. Scholars cluttered every available space, their arms full of ancient texts and crumbling scrolls. Sage Elias stood at the center, looking older and more tired than Thalia had ever seen him. The blood moon is a herald, he explained, his voice heavy. According to the oldest texts, it appears when the veil between past and present grows thin. When ancient powers long dormant begin to wake. What powers? Thalia asked, though she dreaded the answer. Elias unrolled a scroll so old the parchment cracked at the edges. The writing was in a language Thalia didn't recognize, but there were illustrations, wolves that seemed too large, too powerful, with eyes that gleamed even in faded ink. The first wolves, Elias said. The original packs that roamed these lands before civilization, before kingdoms, before law. They were massive, powerful, more magic than flesh. They could level mountains with their howls, call storms with their rage, and live for centuries without aging. They sound like gods, Vance said quietly. They were worshipped as such by early humans. But they were also chaotic, destructive. When they fought among themselves, entire regions were laid waste. So the ancient bloodlines, the strongest wolf clans, made a bargain. Thalia leaned forward. What kind of bargain? They bound the first wolves, used their own blood and magic to create a seal that forced the primordial creatures into dormancy. The first wolves would sleep, and in exchange, the ancient bloodlines agreed to serve as guardians, to maintain the balance between wild magic and civilized order. And if they failed, Kieran asked, though his expression suggested he already knew. If the bloodlines died out completely, or if they abandoned their duty, the seal would weaken. The first wolves would begin to wake. And when they fully awakened, Elias looked directly at Thalia. They would reclaim what was taken. Their freedom, their power, their world. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. But the ancient bloodlines didn't die out, Thalia said slowly. They're in me. I carry that blood. Which is why you're the target. Elias nodded gravely. You're not just a descendant of the ancient bloodlines, Thalia. You might be the last one. The sole remaining guardian of the seal. That's impossible. There must be others. The northern villages where your parents originated were systematically destroyed over the past century, Elias interrupted gently. Wars, plagues, harsh winters. We thought it was natural attrition. But what if it was orchestrated? What if something has been deliberately eliminating the guardian bloodlines, weakening the seal? And now that seal is breaking, Kieran said, his voice tight. That's what the ferals are. That's why they're coordinated despite being mindless. They're responding to the first wolves beginning to wake. And the figure we saw in the forest? Thalia asked. A herald, as it claimed. Someone or something serving the first wolves, preparing the way for their return. Elias's weathered hands trembled slightly. If the seal breaks completely, if the first wolves fully awaken, they won't distinguish between kingdoms and wilderness. They'll destroy everything in their path to reclaim their dominion. How do we stop it? Kieran demanded. We can't. Elias's words fell like stones. Only someone carrying the ancient blood can reinforce the seal. And it requires. He faltered, looking at Thalia with something like pity. It requires what? She pressed. A blood sacrifice. The ancient texts are clear. To bind the first wolves again, a guardian must willingly give their life, their power, their very essence to strengthen the seal for another 1,000 years. The words hung in the air like a death sentence.
No.
Kieran's voice was flat, absolute. Absolutely not. There has to be another way. If there is, I haven't found it in any text. Elias looked genuinely sorrowful. The bargain was always meant to cost the Guardians everything. That was the price of containing such primordial power. Then we find a different solution. Kieran stood, his presence filling the chamber. We fight. We fortify. We evacuate civilians to safe territories if necessary. But we do not sacrifice the Queen. Your Majesty, if the first wolves wake fully, I don't care. Kieran's eyes flashed gold, his wolf rising close to the surface. Let them wake. Let them destroy everything. I will not lose my mate. Kieran. Thalia's quiet voice cut through his rage. We can't just ignore. Watch me. He turned and strode from the chamber, leaving shocked silence in his wake. Thalia remained seated, her mind reeling. Everything was happening too fast, the weight of impossible choices crushing down on her shoulders. Your Majesty, Elder Thane spoke up, his aged voice unusually gentle. No one expects you to make this choice immediately. We have time to research, to explore alternatives. The seal is weakening, but it hasn't broken yet. How much time? Elias consulted his texts. Based on the patterns described here, the progression of the blood moon, the intensity of feral activity, perhaps 2 weeks. Maybe 3 if we're fortunate. 2 weeks to decide if she would sacrifice herself to save the world. Or refuse and watch everything burn. Thalia found Kieran in their chambers, standing at the window with his fists clenched so tight his knuckles were white. You can't ask this of me, he said without turning. You can't expect me to just accept that you're supposed to die. I'm not asking anything yet. She moved to stand beside him, looking out at the fortress below. But we have to at least consider.
No.
He turned to face her, and she saw anguish written across every line of his face. I just found you, Thalia. After years of watching from a distance, after finally having the courage to claim you, after discovering you're my mate, you can't be taken from me. I won't allow it. You may not have a choice. There's always a choice. His hands framed her face, desperate and tender at once. We find another way. We research every text, consult every sage, send to every corner of the realm for knowledge. Someone must know an alternative. And if there isn't one, then we run. His voice broke slightly. We take the fastest horses, ride to the farthest edge of the world, and hide. Let someone else deal with ancient powers and blood debts. I'll give up the crown, the kingdom, everything, as long as you live. Thalia felt tears burning behind her eyes. You don't mean that. I do. God help me. I absolutely will. She pulled him into her arms, holding tight as his carefully maintained control finally shattered. She felt his fear through the bond, raw and overwhelming, the terror of a mate facing the loss of his other half. We have 2 weeks, she whispered against his chest. 2 weeks to find another way. Let's use them. Research, investigate, explore every possibility. But Kieran, she pulled back to look at him. If at the end of those 2 weeks, we haven't found an alternative, we have to at least discuss what comes next. Thalia, promise me. We discussed it. We don't just bury our heads and pretend the choice doesn't exist. She saw the war in his eyes, between his desire to protect her and his respect for her autonomy. Finally, reluctantly, he nodded. 2 weeks. We explore every option. But I'm not promising to accept any outcome that ends with you dead. Fair enough. They held each other as night fell, drawing strength from their bond, from the love that had grown between them despite every obstacle. Outside, the moon rose, still tinged red, a constant reminder that time was running out. The next 2 weeks became a desperate race against time. Every scholar in the fortress worked around the clock, translating ancient texts and searching for alternatives. Messengers were sent to distant libraries and reclusive sages. Cora helped Thalia research her family history, trying to trace the bloodline back to its origins. Kieran barely slept, dividing his time between leading the research efforts and overseeing the fortress's defenses. Reports of feral attacks continued to pour in from all directions now, north, south, east, and west. The creatures were growing bolder, their attacks more coordinated. And every night, the moon rose a deeper shade of red. Thalia threw herself into training, pushing her wolf harder than ever. If she was going to face this threat, whether through sacrifice or battle, she needed to be at her strongest. It was during one of these training sessions that she felt it, a pull, deep in her chest, like a hook behind her ribs, tugging her towards something she couldn't see. She stopped mid-strike, her practice sword clattering to the ground. Your Majesty? Her training partner looked concerned. Are you well? Thalia pressed a hand to her chest, feeling the pull intensify. I need to see the king. She found Kieran in the archives, surrounded by towers of books and looking haggard. Something's happening, she said without preamble. I can feel it. A pull, like something's calling to me. Kieran was on his feet immediately. Where? I don't know. Just away. North, I think. It's hard to describe. Before Kieran could respond, a guard burst into the archives. Your Majesties. The Northern Watchtower reports strange lights in the sky. And the ferals, thousands of them, they're gathering in the Shadowpine Forest. Just gathering. Not attacking. Just waiting. Kieran and Thalia exchanged glances. It's beginning, she whispered. Then we end it. Kieran's jaw set with determination. Gather the full army. Every warrior, every able-bodied wolf. If these creatures want to fight, we'll give them one. Kieran, we can't. I won't lose you to some ancient prophecy without a fight. His eyes blazed with fierce determination. If the first wolves want to wake, they'll have to go through me first. Through the bond, Thalia felt his absolute resolve. He would die before he let her sacrifice herself. And looking at the red moon rising through the window, she realized she felt the same way about him. Whatever was coming, they would face it together, even if it meant the end of everything. Chapter 13. The Choice of Queens. The shadow pine forest stretched like a dark scar across the northern horizon, and within it, thousands of red eyes gleamed in the darkness. Thalia stood on the fortress walls beside Kieran, looking out at the gathered ferals. Behind them, the full might of Silvercrest's forces assembled. Every warrior, every soldier, every wolf who could fight. But even their impressive numbers seemed small compared to the sea of twisted creatures waiting in the trees. "This is madness," Counselor Vance said quietly. "We should evacuate, pull back to more defensible positions. And let them follow us to civilian populations?" Kieran's voice was hard.
No.
"We make our stand here. We end this tonight." The pull in Thalia's chest had grown stronger throughout the day, so intense now it was almost painful. Every instinct screamed at her to go north, to answer whatever was calling her. "They're waiting for something," she said, studying the unmoving ferals. "They have the numbers to attack, but they're just waiting." "Waiting for you," Sage Elias said from behind them. The old healer had insisted on being present despite his age. The herald said you must choose. "I believe this is that moment." "Choose what exactly?" Kieran demanded.
To go to them.
"To face whatever test the first wolves have prepared. Or to refuse, and let this conflict spiral into all-out war. If she goes to them alone, they'll kill her. Perhaps. Or perhaps they'll offer the choice they spoke of, the chance to reinforce the seal through sacrifice, or to let it break and see what follows. That's not a choice. That's coercion." Kieran's hand found Thalia's, gripping tight. "I won't let them take you." Thalia looked at the gathered army, then at the waiting ferals, then finally at Kieran, her mate, her king, her everything. "What if there's another way?" she said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. What if the ancient texts are incomplete? They were written so long ago, passed down through generations, translated and retranslated. What if the sacrifice isn't about death, but about choice? About what we're willing to give up? "That's speculation," Elder Thane said, though his tone was less dismissive than usual. "Everything about this situation is speculation." Thalia turned to face Kieran fully. "But I can feel it, through my wolf, through the bloodline itself. This calling isn't malevolent. It's desperate. Like pleading for help rather than demanding submission. Or it's a trap designed to make you lower your guard. Maybe." She squeezed his hand. "But I have to know. I have to at least hear what they're offering before we commit to a battle that could kill thousands." "No. Kieran. No." His voice broke on the word. "I can't lose you. Don't ask me to let you walk into that forest alone. Then don't let me walk alone." Thalia pulled his hand to her chest, pressing it over her heart where the mate bond pulsed between them. "Come with me. Face this together like we promised." "Your Majesties," Vance interjected, "you can't both risk." "The counselor is right," Kieran said, but his eyes never left Thalia's. "One of you should stay to command if things go wrong." "Then you stay. You're the better commander, the more experienced warrior." Thalia tried to pull her hand free, but he held firm. "And you're the one they're calling. The one with ancient blood. If anyone goes, it has to be you." His jaw clenched. "But I'm going with you. To hell with tactical sense. You're my mate, and I won't let you face this alone. If we both die." Then Vance commands the army to retreat and protect what remains. Kieran turned to the counselor. "If we're not back by dawn, you know what to do. Evacuate civilians. Fall back to the mountain fortresses. Preserve what you can of the kingdom." "Your Majesty, that's an order." Kieran's voice carried the absolute authority of a king. "But we're not planning to die tonight. We're planning to end this." He turned back to Thalia, and through the bond, she felt his terror warring with his trust in her. "Together?" he asked. "Together," she confirmed. They shifted in the courtyard, their wolves emerging in fluid transformations. Kieran's wolf was massive and silver-gray, radiating alpha power. Thalia's midnight black form stood nearly as tall, her golden eyes gleaming with ancient bloodline magic. Through their bond, they could communicate without words now, thoughts and emotions flowing freely between them. "I love you," Kieran's wolf sent. "Whatever happens in that forest, remember that." "I love you too," Thalia responded. "And we're coming back. Both of us." They leaped from the fortress walls, landing with grace that seemed impossible for creatures their size, and raced toward the shadow pine forest. Behind them, the army watched in stunned silence as their king and queen disappeared into darkness. The ferals parted as Thalia and Kieran approached, creating a path through their twisted ranks. Up close, the creatures were even more horrifying. Malformed bodies, eyes that held nothing but hunger and madness, mouths that dripped with poisonous saliva. But they didn't attack. Just watched with those red eyes as the two royal wolves passed. The pull in Thalia's chest grew stronger, leading her deeper into the forest until they reached a clearing she'd never seen before. Ancient stones stood in a circle here, covered in runes that glowed faintly in the blood-red moonlight. And in the center of the circle stood the herald. The skull-masked figure seemed larger here, more solid. Reality bent around it like heat waves, and Thalia's wolf instincts screamed danger. "You came," the layered voices said. "Both of you. Interesting." The text spoke only of the guardian. They did not mention a mate. "Where she goes, I go," Kieran's wolf growled, his voice deeper and more primal in this form. "Love. How quaint. And yet, perhaps relevant." The herald tilted its head. The ancient bargain was made in a different time, when wolves ran alone, without bonds, without the connections that now define your kind. Perhaps that is why the seal has weakened, because the bargain itself is outdated. "Explain," Thalia demanded. The first wolves were bound by blood sacrifice because the ancient guardians had nothing else powerful enough to contain such beings. But they were solitary creatures, their magic individual and finite. You, daughter of the old blood, are different. You carry not just ancient power, but the mate bond, a connection that multiplies strength, that creates something greater than the sum of its parts. The herald raised one hand, and images appeared in the air, visions of the past. Wolves running alone, powerful but isolated. Then images of modern packs, of mates bonded together, of power shared and amplified. The old bargain required death, because one wolf's magic, no matter how ancient, could only contain the first wolves temporarily. But bonded mates? Two sources of power merged into one? That might be enough to create a permanent seal. One that doesn't require death. Only sacrifice of a different kind. "What kind of sacrifice?" Kieran asked, though Thalia could feel his suspicion through the bond. "Your bond. Your connection. The magic that ties you together." The herald's skull mask seemed to stare directly at them. "If you sever the mate bond willingly, channel that power into the seal, it would be strong enough to bind the first wolves permanently. They would sleep forever, no longer requiring guardians or periodic reinforcement." Thalia felt as if she'd been struck. Sever the mate bond? Lose the connection that had become as essential as breathing? "No," Kieran said immediately. "There has to be another way." "There is." The herald gestured, and the ground beneath them began to glow. "You refuse. Let the seal break. Let the first wolves wake. They will reclaim this world, destroy your civilizations, but they will also bring back the old magic. The wild power that once made wolves truly magnificent. You would become like them, immortal, powerful beyond measure. No longer bound by human weaknesses or brief lifespans." "At the cost of how many lives?" Thalia asked. "Does it matter? Humans are temporary. Kingdoms rise and fall. But the first wolves are eternal. By refusing to sacrifice your bond, you could become eternal with them. You and your mate, together forever, as gods among wolves." The temptation was there. Thalia could feel it. To never lose Kieran. To never watch him age and die while her ancient blood kept her young. To run together through centuries, powerful and free. And everyone else?
Kieran pressed.
The pack? The kingdom? The innocents who would die in the first wolf's awakening. Irrelevant in the scope of eternity. Not to us. Thalia moved closer to Kieran, their wolves standing shoulder to shoulder. We didn't become king and queen to abandon our people for personal gain. Then you condemn yourself to separation and eventual loss. The herald's voice held something almost like pity. If you sever the bond, you save your world but lose each other. Not immediately, you can remain together as companions, allies, rulers. But the connection that lets you feel each other's thoughts, share each other's emotions, know each other's souls? That ends. You become individuals again, powerful but alone. Thalia felt Kieran's anguish through the bond, the same terror she felt herself. To lose this connection, this perfect understanding, this sense of being complete? I can't, Kieran's wolf sent. I can't lose you. Not like this. And I can't let thousands die because we're too selfish to make the sacrifice. Thalia responded, her heart breaking. What kind of queen would I be? The kind that deserves to be happy. The kind that shouldn't have to give up everything. But I'm also the kind that doesn't send others to face what I won't face myself. Through the bond, she felt his understanding. His agreement, even as it destroyed him. If we do this, Kieran spoke aloud, his wolf's voice rough with emotion. Our people live? The seal holds permanently.
Yes.
The first wolves sleep forever. Your kingdom endures. The ferals return to mindless beasts that can be hunted and contained. All you lose is each other, at least the supernatural connection. The love, the partnership, the physical relationship, those you can keep if you choose. You just won't feel each other's souls anymore. Thalia and Kieran looked at each other. Through the bond, for perhaps the last time, they shared everything. Every memory since they met. Every moment of longing during years of watching from a distance. Every second of joy since finally coming together. Every dream of the future they'd hoped to build. I love you, Thalia sent. I will always love you, bond or no bond. And I love you, Kieran responded. In this life, and whatever comes after. You are mine, and I am yours. No magic required. They turned back to the herald as one. We accept, Thalia said. We sever the bond. We save our people. A noble choice. And a painful one. The herald raised both hands, and the ancient stones began to glow brighter. Step into the circle. Place your paws on the center stone. When I begin the ritual, channel everything you feel for each other into the seal. Every emotion, every connection, every piece of your soul that has merged. Give it freely, and the first wolves will sleep forever. Thalia and Kieran moved to the center stone, their paws touching its surface. The runes beneath them blazed with light, and Thalia felt power surge through her, ancient, primal, terrifying. The herald began to chant in a language older than memory, and Thalia felt the bond start to unravel. It was agony. Not physical pain, but something worse, the sensation of being torn apart at the soul level. Every connection, every shared emotion, every piece of their merged consciousness began to separate. Through the rapidly fraying bond, she felt Kieran's pain mirroring hers. Felt his love, his anguish, his desperate desire to stop this even as he knew they couldn't. Don't forget me, she sent as the bond stretched thin. Never, came his response. Not in 1,000 years. Not in eternity. And then, with a sensation like something snapping deep inside her chest, the bond broke. The silence in her mind was deafening. For years, she'd been alone in her head. But she'd only known that loneliness for weeks as bonded, and now returning to it felt like losing a limb. She could still see Kieran standing beside her, his wolf form magnificent in the magical light, but she couldn't feel him anymore. Couldn't sense his emotions, or hear his thoughts, or know his soul. He was right there, and yet impossibly distant. The power they'd released flowed into the ground, into the ancient stones, into the very fabric of the world. Beneath them, Deep in places that existed beyond normal sight, Thalia sensed something massive and ancient settling back into sleep. The first wolves, accepting the new seal, bound by the power of a love so strong it had required destroying its own bond to protect others. The herald lowered its hands, and the light faded. It is done. The seal is permanent. The first wolves sleep beyond waking. You have saved your world at the cost of your connection. The herald's skull mask tilted. Was it worth it? Thalia shifted back to human form, not caring about her nakedness. Kieran did the same, and they stood facing each other in the moonlight. Ask me in 100 years, Kieran said softly, his hand reaching out to cup Thalia's face. The touch was the same, warm, gentle, possessive, but the supernatural dimension was gone. Just flesh on flesh, without the magic that had let them share souls. It was worth it, Thalia said firmly, covering his hand with hers. We saved thousands of lives. We ended a threat that could have destroyed everything. That's what rulers do. They sacrifice for their people. Even when the sacrifice breaks them? Especially then. The herald made a sound that might have been approved. The ancient guardians would not have made this choice. They valued power over connection, survival over sacrifice. Perhaps your kind truly has evolved into something better. Or perhaps. The figure paused. Perhaps you have simply learned what the first wolves never understood. That true strength comes not from standing alone, but from choosing to stand together, even when that choice costs everything. The herald began to fade, its form becoming translucent. I was never their servant, you know. I was their test. To see if the guardians of this age were worthy of permanently binding the old powers. You passed. The world is yours to shape now, free from the threat of ancient chaos. Use the gift wisely. And then it was gone, leaving Thalia and Kieran alone in the clearing. Around them, the ferals began to collapse. The connection to the first wolves severed. They reverted to simple corpses. The red tinge faded from the moon, returning it to its normal silver glow. It was over. They'd won. And it felt like losing. Kieran pulled Thalia into his arms, holding her as if she might disappear. She clung to him just as desperately, and they stood there in the ruins of their bond, mourning what they'd sacrificed even as they accepted it was necessary. I can't feel you anymore, Kieran whispered against her hair. I don't know what you're thinking, what you're feeling. It's like I've lost half of myself. I know. I feel it too. Thalia pulled back to look at him, and even without the bond, she could read the pain in his eyes. But I can still see you. Still touch you. I still love you. That doesn't require magic.
No.
But it was so much easier when I could feel your love, not just believe in it. Then we learned to believe again. She took his hand, threading their fingers together in a gesture that felt both familiar and heartbreakingly different without the bond's warmth flowing between them. We learned to trust words instead of feelings, to read expressions instead of emotions, to be together the way humans are, through faith instead of certainty. I don't know if I can.
You can.
We both can. Thalia stood on her toes and kissed him, just a kiss now, without the supernatural dimension that had made every touch transcendent. Because we're not just mates anymore, Kieran. We're partners. King and queen. Two people who chose each other, choose each other still, and will keep choosing each other every day. Bond or no bond. A sound from the forest made them turn. The army was approaching, led by Counselor Vance, all of them staring at the field of dead ferals and the two naked monarchs standing among ancient stones. Your Majesties, Vance called. You're alive. What happened? Kieran and Thalia exchanged glances, a moment of understanding that didn't require the bond, just years of knowing each other. We won, Kieran said simply. The threat is over. The first wolves sleep permanently. The kingdom is safe. At what cost? Vance asked, his sharp eyes taking in their body language, the careful distance between them despite holding hands. At the cost any good ruler should be willing to pay, Thalia said firmly. Our personal comfort for the safety of our people. Nothing more, nothing less. The army erupted in cheers, celebrating a victory they didn't fully understand. Wolves howled into the night, a chorus of relief and triumph. And through it all, Thalia and Kieran stood together, hands clasped, facing their kingdom as partners rather than bonded mates. It would be enough, Thalia told herself. It had to be, because the alternative was unthinkable. 6 months passed. Silvercrest Fortress rebuilt what had been damaged during the conflict. The western and northern territories were resettled. Life slowly returned to normal, though the stories of the Blood Moon and the king and queen who had saved the realm grew into legend. Thalia and Kieran ruled together, and to outside observers, nothing had changed. They sat side by side at council meetings. They made decisions jointly. They appeared together at state functions, a united front of royal power. But those who knew them best could see the difference. The easy intimacy had become something more careful. The unconscious touches had to be deliberate now. The unspoken understanding required actual words. "You're brooding again," Cora said, finding Thalia alone in the gardens one afternoon. "I'm thinking," Thalia corrected, using the same words she'd used months ago before everything changed. "Same thing." Cora sat beside her. "You miss it. The bond." "Every day." Thalia didn't see the point in denying it. "Every moment, I reach for that connection and find nothing. It's like losing a sense. You don't realize how much you relied on it until it's gone." "Does he feel the same way?" "I don't know. We don't talk about it." Thalia pulled her knees to her chest. "Talking about it just makes it worse. Reminds us of what we gave up. But you don't regret it?"
No.
"I'd make the same choice again." Thalia looked at her friend. Thousands of lives saved. Permanent peace from an ancient threat. That's worth any personal sacrifice. But not regretting it doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. Cora was quiet for a moment. "He watches you, you know, when you're not looking. The same way he did before, like you're the only thing in the world that matters." "I watch him too." Then maybe the bond was never the important part. Maybe it was just confirmation of what already existed. Thalia wanted to believe that. Some days, she almost could. That evening, she found Kieran in their chambers, reviewing reports. He looked up when she entered, and his face softened into a smile, genuine, warm, but missing something she couldn't name. "Long day?" he asked. "Aren't they all?" She moved to sit beside him, and he put his work aside immediately, giving her his full attention. They'd learned to do that, to be intentionally present since they couldn't feel each other's needs anymore. "I've been thinking," Kieran said carefully, "about what we gave up, about whether it was truly necessary." Thalia's heart clenched. "You're having regrets?"
No.
"Never that. But I wonder." He took her hand, studying it as if he'd never seen it before. "I wonder if we let the loss of the supernatural connection make us forget the natural one. We loved each other before the bond formed, Thalia. That night in your chambers, when you kissed me, that wasn't the bond. That was you.
Us.
I know, but we're so focused on mourning what we lost that we're forgetting to appreciate what remains." He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "I can't feel your emotions anymore, but I can see them in your eyes. I can hear them in your voice. I can learn to read them with the set of your shoulders and the tilt of your head." He pulled her closer, his arms coming around her waist. The bond made it easy, made everything effortless. But maybe something worth having should require effort, should be chosen every day rather than simply existing. Thalia felt tears burning behind her eyes. "You really believe that?" "I'm trying to." His smile was crooked, vulnerable in a way the unshakable king rarely showed. "Because the alternative is living in the ghost of what we had instead of building something new. And I don't want to waste whatever time we have together mourning instead of loving. Even if loving is harder now. Especially if it's harder. Because that means it matters more. That we're choosing it deliberately instead of just accepting what destiny handed us." Thalia kissed him then, and without the bond enhancing every sensation, it was just a kiss. Just lips and breath, and the warmth of another person. And somehow, that made it more precious, more real. When they finally pulled apart, Kieran rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said. "Not because a magical bond tells me to. Not because destiny decreed it. But because you're brave and strong and brilliant and stubborn. Because you challenge me and support me and make me want to be better. Because I choose you, Thalia. Every day, with or without magic. I choose you too," she whispered. "Today and tomorrow and every day after. Bond or no bond, you're mine and I'm yours." It wasn't the transcendent connection they'd shared before. It wasn't easy or effortless or guaranteed. But it was real. It was chosen. And perhaps that made it stronger than any magic could have been. Years passed. Thalia and Kieran ruled Silvercrest with wisdom earned through sacrifice. They never regained the supernatural bond they'd given up, but they built something different. A partnership based on choice and trust and daily recommitment to each other. They had children eventually. 3 pups who inherited their parents' strength and their mother's ancient bloodline. And though none would ever need to make the sacrifice Thalia had, they grew up knowing that true leadership meant putting others before yourself. The story of the Blood Moon became legend. Some versions remembered the sacrifice accurately. Others embellished or forgot details. But all agreed on one thing. The king and queen who had saved the realm had loved each other enough to give up their greatest gift. On quiet evenings, when official duties were done and the children were asleep, Thalia and Kieran would stand together on the fortress walls, looking out at the kingdom they'd saved. "Do you ever wonder what it would have been like?" Kieran asked one such evening. "If we'd kept the bond? If we'd refused the sacrifice?" "Sometimes," Thalia admitted. "But then I remember, we'd either be dead or we'd have watched our kingdom fall. And I realize I prefer this reality, even with its pain. Even missing what we had, we haven't lost it. We've just changed it." She took his hand, the gesture still sending a little thrill through her after all these years. "The bond made it magical, but we make it meaningful. And I'll take meaning over magic any day." Kieran pulled her close, and they stood together as the moon, silver and beautiful and no longer red, rose over their kingdom. 2 wolves who had given up destiny's gift to forge their own path. 2 rulers who had chosen duty over desire, only to find that the choice had made their love stronger, not weaker. 2 souls that no longer shared a supernatural bond, but had built something better through years of choosing each other, day after day, in the ordinary moments that made up a life. Magic had brought them together, but it was their choice that kept them that way. And in the end, that was the greatest magic of all. The end. Thank you for following their journey from rejection to love to sacrifice to lasting partnership. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.